whole world was changing in those days.
And also we had the world's ear because we had just released an enormous selling single. Listen to the Flower.
Flower people.
We toured the world, we toured the States.
Toured the world and elsewhere.
It was a dream come true.
You know, there's a new awareness sweeping the world these days. Call it peace, call it love, call it flower power. We just call it the hottest sound across the Atlantic since Mrs. Murphy's Chowder. They're from England, and don't let the name scare you. They're full of love. Please welcome...
The EscapeGoat podcast. A podcast series featuring the discussion of many different topics, flaws and all, based on personal whims and fascinations. Hosted by me, David Fagiani, and several different guests. Hello, welcome to the EscapeGoat podcast, episode 48. I'm very, very happy indeed to welcome back, after quite a long gap really, welcome back Rich Gilbert to the podcast. How are you doing?
I'm all right. How are you?
Not so bad. Yeah, it's great to get you back on, actually. I was looking up just before we came on air, so to speak, that the last time you were on the podcast was for that one we recorded with me and Matt and you about Hail to the Thief, which was actually recorded last February. So
last February, over a year ago?
Yeah.
Bloody hell, it doesn't feel like that long ago.
I know, it's crazy, isn't it? Yeah, it's really flown by. But yeah, it's that was a good one, and it's good to get you back on for another sort of music approximate one. I just wanted to talk to you as a sort of something in the way of a warm up, but it may stay in the episode, about a ridiculous purchase that I made the other day. Because
proceed.
Yeah, so I was messaging Kit, who's also been on the podcast about this actually, but for some reason I fell down a bit of an Alien versus Predator nostalgia hole.
Right.
It's weird.
Is anyone nostalgic for either the films or the video game?
Well, sort of. So I mean, this is the thing. Is like, having been an Alien and primarily Alien, but also Predator geek since I was a kid, basically since I was a bit too young. In the sort of 90s and early noughties, I was a bit into the sort of comics and spin-off novels and things like that, and definitely into the video games. Starting with the PC one, in the late 90s. Yeah. And obviously, you and I have played at least one of the video games together, haven't we? Like, it was the 2010 one.
It was around 2010. It was on. I think you rented it. Yeah,
that's right. Yeah, it was the last,
quite understand.
Last blockbuster things. Yeah, it was good fun. But I mean, obviously. So I don't know why, but I basically rewatched both of the movies that came out in the noughties, which are, bit to be said there, but they're both basically not good. It's still are not good. And then I was, watching some bits on YouTube of like Let's Plays and people playing the video games that I fondly remember and things like that. But then I made a ridiculous purchase. This is where I arguably took it too far.
Did you buy a shoulder cannon?
yeah. It's not really licensed. But I bought this book, which, for the benefit of the listeners, is AVP Ultimate Prey, which is an anthology of short fiction involving the aliens and the predators by various artists, one might say.
Artists, generous.
I'll let you be the judge. I've basically only just started reading it, but I've read 4 stories into it, and they... I mean, it seems to be like they've given some thought to, what different settings and stuff you could put the aliens and the predators in, including some historical settings and things like that. And the first 3 stories vary wildly in quality, I'd say. I'd say the third one is actually quite good, quite creepy. It actually kind of does a sort of Western homestead kind of setting, which is...
Okay, so it's set in the Old West?
Yeah.
I was going to ask what periods they send them back to. Presumably the Regency is the most fun.
What the alien just lives in Brighton Pavilion?
Yeah, just slaughtering the Prince Regent's friends in duels. Yeah,
I'd watch that. But I think there's a Conquistador one. There's that kind of thing. Okay. It's but yeah, I just want to talk to you about the 4th one because I just read this the other night and it's mental. So basically, clearly the idea that they've gone with the sort of serial numbers filed off is, what if the aliens and the predators fought in the Overlook Hotel from The Shining? That's the sort of
Right. Okay.
That's the concept. They actually called it the Hotel Mariposa. So I think it's meant to also have sort of Hotel California associations and things like that. But it's basically the Overlook Hotel. It's an abandoned hotel with weird sort of time and space warping properties and ghosts and ornately described carpets and things like that. It's
Okay. And blood getting off at the 4th floor.
yes, yeah, that kind of thing. But it's amazing because, well, for a number of reasons. But one is the predator. It's one of those stories where you get the predator's kind of in a monologue basically, about its actual perspective on things. And the predator turns out to have been traumatized by having an alcoholic parent. I'm not making this up. I don't know if this was like the author trying to tap into the sort of some of the themes of The Shining even further, and things like that. I presume so, because the predator basically, like, in hunting aliens and sort of co-hunting with the human, as usually happens in these things, it sort of deals with its trauma, and then like a vision of its mum comes and like speaks to it and like gives it closure. And I was just like, this is amazing. Like, this is so gonzo.
Like was it like it's explicitly alcohol? There's not some kind of like alien brew. It's specifically the same stuff.
It's like hooch. It's bathtub hooch.
Yeah, I call bullshit.
As you probably should, yeah. But I just, it's I had that kind of. I've largely come to terms with my own sort of like pulp taste and things. But it was one of those moments where I was reading that and I was like, I haven't read Finnegan's Wake yet. I was like, and here I am spending money and time on this.
Well, I think you can rest assured that if Joyce had been living a 21st century postmodern life, rather than writing Finnegan's Wake, he would be writing Alien versus Predator fan fiction.
I think so. Yeah, I can imagine a sort of like a predator wakes up one day in Dublin and has to go through a series of errands, and it ends with maybe like a whole chapter that's just like the alien's point of view with no punctuation.
Yeah, just grabbing and going for a shit.
Yeah, that's definitely what he meant to say. Yeah. Have you been consuming any media recently? What's been keeping you sane?
No, I have been sort of doing some music stuff with some friends, and that's pretty much it. Like, in terms of culture or art, me and a drummer and a keyboardist making music that sounds like it should have been made 20 years ago, 30 years ago, when music was perfect.
Yeah, obviously when it was finished.
Yeah. Before everyone, started adding all those appendices to everything. But so not much.
Is that with the mind to do any sort of like performances or anything like that?
I want to sort of like, not in the short term anyway, because it's not good enough yet, and we haven't got any proper songs, just messing about. But I'd like to. Yeah, I can't speak for the other two.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm not sure where you'd even do that kind of thing now in Manchester, because I'm just completely out of touch with the venues of the right size and things.
I mean, there will be gigs, but presumably you have to know the right people to get in, and I don't know anyone because I don't leave my flat.
I see where you're going wrong there.
Yeah, that'd be my first mistake.
The thing about the Beatles is they did leave their flat, didn't they? It snowballed.
Couldn't get them in their flats. That was a problem. Absentee landlords.
They left their flat and just appeared in the Cavern Club, and it just sort of just from there it just went. Yeah. Okay. Well, let's wade into the main topic at hand, because quite a lot to cover really. But I got you on the show because you've been on the show previously talking about a few different topics, but two of them have been music focused, and one was about the Pixies that we did way back in 2020. One of the I think it was episode 8 of the show, so that was one of the real formative ones. And then we talked with my brother about Hail to the Thief by Radiohead just over a year ago, as I mentioned. And I've known for a while, because we're both quite big Beatles nerds, really. And I've known for a while I wanted to chat about the Beatles to you in some form or another. And I was chatting to you a few weeks ago about what we'd actually just almost like arbitrarily choose to focus on there. And I think the two ideas I had was I basically wanted to talk about either Magical Mystery Tour, the EP and the film together probably, or what we actually chose in the end, which is the White Album, the Beatles, the '68 album. We both listened to the White Album for this and re-listened to it a few times. I wanted to talk to you about the album in general and kind of our background with Beatles fandom, and then I think in the second half of the podcast we're going to talk a little bit about not just track by track the album, but we've attempted to do this thing which is somewhat predictable, I guess, and definitely I will put a disclaimer. We know this is missing the point of what makes the White Album good. We've attempted to cut the sprawling double album that is the White Album down to a single LP length, so I've cut down 30 tracks to 15 tracks, and me and Rich have both separately done that. And as of recording this, we don't know what each other's picks have been, so we're going to, in the second half of the podcast, we're going to go through that and kind of chat about the tracks as we reveal the shortlist that we've chosen, and I'll probably put those in the show notes. But first, Rich, I just wanted to ask you, I suppose, like, as someone who's like roughly my age and was, like a kid in the 90s and stuff, how did you come to the Beatles? Like, what was that? Where did you pick them up from, and how did that get under your skin, in a sense?
I don't remember ever not being aware of them, but I can remember getting the step into getting into them, which was either at my parents' encouragement or off my own bat, going into their record collection, which wasn't particularly big, and listening to Sgt. Pepper's. And I listened to that, I think, pretty much every night after school. I'd come back in, put on the record player with headphones on. It felt like ages. I mean, everything felt like ages when you were a kid, but it felt like months of listening to it pretty much on repeat every day. And I liked it so much, I was really reluctant to listen to any other Beatles albums after that. Like me going from Sgt. Pepper's to listening to Revolver for the first time was a couple of years, because I didn't want to listen to anything else, because I thought Sgt. Pepper's was just the end.
So they were the Sgt. Pepper band for you for a while, almost.
Yeah, that plus the inescapable sort of singles that you couldn't not hear. So they're on the radio. So I know all the early singles. I know I know Hey Jude and all the stuff that was on the radio all the time anyway.
Yeah.
But as an album band, which of course they definitely were by this point, I didn't listen to any others for ages, and I don't know why, but maybe I didn't want the magic to be the bubble to be burst. But eventually, obviously, like, grew up and listened to Revolver next and Abbey Road, because those are the two that. Those were a handful of the albums that both my parents had, so there are 2 copies of each, which I use as a kind of gauge for what the best ones to listen to are, which is not the best way of doing it. But yeah, so I then went from Sgt. Pepper's to Revolver to Abbey Road, and I knew those backwards as well. And yeah, I just gradually going through it until I was about in my mid-teens, when I was I knew everything the Beatles had done. And then sort of went off them a bit when I was in my late teens, because I thought I was trying to be cool, I guess. And by the time I was back I was at uni, say in my 20s, I didn't care about that stuff anymore, so I was still, big Beatles nerd. But I don't listen to them that much really anymore, because I don't know what else to do with them.
It's almost something you've over-obsessed about at an earlier age, so you're just kind of not sure the fresh take. Yeah.
A bit like, it's quite similar to what I was saying about Radiohead when I was talking to you and Matt about it. A band I was completely obsessed with, knew everything they'd done, and then sort of kind of burnt myself out on them a little bit.
Yeah, it's interesting. Were your parents Beatles fans? Like, were you coming at it with any sort of steer on in that sense? Or?
Yeah, they were both Beatles fans, insofar as neither of them were a massive, like, obsessive music fans. Like I say, the record collection was not particularly big. Yeah, it's one of the few bands that both my parents liked. But it was never like it was never. I was never sat down and said, "These are the ones you should listen to." And also their sense of the Beatles canon is very, very singles heavy. Even though they owned these albums, I don't think they ever listened to them in the way I did. Like, sat down and listened to the whole thing over and over again until you knew everything. So even now, when people ask, when the Beatles chats come up at home, which they do rarely, but if they ever do, and you talk about your favourite Beatles songs and stuff, a lot of the album tracks, but particularly the White Album. My parents won't be that familiar with, but they know all the singles, all the stuff on the number one record. The one that came out in the early 2000s or late 90s with all their number ones on.
Yeah, I do remember that. Yeah, I remember.
That was the album that got played the most. The most played Beatles album in our house was that one.
Yeah, it's funny. I want to talk to you about the sort of Beatles and where they were at in the 90s compared to where they might be at now, sort of culturally and stuff. Because but just before that, I was going to say my parents were both big Beatles fans. They're kind of the 60s, like sort of canonical 60s group that we grew up with the most, and obviously I imbibed loads of other 60s music, 60s, 70s music from my parents, but the Beatles were like conventionally the sort of unchallenged prime amongst those. And my mum's favourite Beatles album is Abbey Road, and I think part of that reflects she was born in 52, so she'd be like 17, 18 when it came out, which is interesting actually when you compare it to our age, roughly when Hail to the Thief comes out, right? It's kind of the same juncture. And I want to come back to Radiohead actually, we'll talk about this later, but actually I think it was just last year, me and Mum walked past Abbey Road Studios for the first time either of us had actually been outside.
I've never been.
Yeah, it was good fun. It's of course very near Lord's Cricket Ground, which might be another draw.
That'll be a draw. Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, me and my brother picked up the albums, and mostly, of course, what we're talking about here is like CD versions, like kind of issued in the 90s and things, and basically worked my way, not in any order, but worked my way through the Beatles albums fairly voraciously. I think probably, like you, I can't remember when I'd never heard of them at all, but I'd heard bits and pieces of them as a kid, but I think I probably started sort of independently scrutinising them, I suppose, when I was about sort of 9, 10, that kind of area, and kind of,
Yeah, I think that sounds about the age that I was, like I say, coming home from school and listening to Sgt. Pepper's over and over again. I was about 10, about 10 sounds about right. And then it carried through into my teens in a way that actually gained me a little bit of mockery, like particularly in the early stages of high school. Obviously, you get mocked for everything in the early stages of high school, but I think I wasn't trying to be like young fogey-ish. I'd picked up so much of my parents' music taste that I was sort of drenched in it, and I wasn't really trying to hide it in the way that I might have done if I was a bit more canny, So I was just kind of like going on about Captain Beefheart and Frank Zappa and Pink Floyd and stuff to my school friends who mostly didn't care, and thought it gave me at best a sort of amusing, from another age kind of vibe, But I wasn't trying to cultivate that. I wasn't that self-aware, I was just, I suppose I was sort of stubbornly sticking to my guns a little bit, Yeah, that's similar to me, but perhaps less cool than you. Like, and I know that's saying something because there was nothing like Frank Zappa or Captain Beefheart or anything remotely touching the avant-garde that I was ever exposed to until I was older and found it myself. So the stuff I liked was in sort of early high school was very, very classic rock. So Pink Floyd was one of them, Zeppelin was the other, and I knew I was cultivating something. Like, I didn't know quite what I was doing because I was a teenager and I was an idiot. But I thought I was more sophisticated for liking old music than all the kids who liked Blink-182 and stuff.
Presumably started reading quite a lot.
I still think that
stuff as well. Yeah, of course. Yeah, but reading magazines and I suppose like the early stages of sort of internet reading and things like that.
Well, the internet was a frustratingly late revelation to me. So I read a lot of the print music press, which was the sort of two strands to it, and they're both in their own way in the UK anyway, pretty reactionary. So on the one hand, you had sort of like Q magazine with its sort of classic rock focus, and if it's not Dylan, there's Dylan and everything else is a step down. Or The NME, which is obviously in the early 2000s just desperately pining for the Britpop to come back and seeing it everywhere, even though it was mercifully dead.
Nostalgia for Britpop is an interesting double layering, isn't it?
I mean, I didn't really notice at the time, but looking back and like at the point where I sort of properly lost any interest in the NMEs, and it's in the mid 2000s when I was in my late teens, I had noticed that basically every little movement they were after was trying to recapture Britpop, which I had no interest in at all.
Well, we've talked before about the sort of, even some of the music from that time that we quite like. Easy example, the Futureheads, for example. You can tell that there's a sort of hunger for, admittedly, a bit more regional kind of, variation in sort of British guitar music, essentially. But there's definitely they're trying to restore something there a bit, aren't they?
Yeah. It is like even you can't really blame the bands for this, and unless their output is shit. So I wouldn't blame the Futureheads for this. But the NME were trying. We're constantly calling it a new movement when it really was barely a movement.
Yeah.
And then that led to the promotion of like sort of the second wave of like British, what's now called the landfill indie stuff. So all your, having had the Futureheads and Frams, you're suddenly into Razorlight and Kaiser Chiefs, and which are a lot more Britpoppy in their laddishness.
It's funny that most of those bands weren't reaching back to the 60s, whether they were reaching back to sort of the late 70s and early 80s,
Yeah, it was quite a small pool of influence. Like that's the thing that that the NME didn't give me, which the internet eventually did. And when I found online criticism, my entire world exploded. But like the NME canon was really small. and it was just like Pistols and the punk stuff, the post-punk stuff, ideally from Manchester, and the Smiths and the Stone Roses. That's, and things that are peripheral to that. So they'll throw in the Jesus and Mary Chain occasionally, but more or less that's the story that leads to Oasis, which is the end of music.
Yeah,
in many ways, actually, in many ways, true.
I remember, it's funny you mentioned the Jesus and Mary Chain. I remember, it's a bit of a tangent, but I remember I think it was Gary Mulholland. I've got several books by it, who was talking about that kind of thing that's ultimately unanswerable, but kind of those debates of like who was the last rock, quote unquote rock and roll band and things like that. Sort of like, where does that lineage end? Basically, like how far can you stretch and evolve it before it, I suppose, A, reaches a pinnacle of experimentalism and evolution, and B, becomes a dead end probably at the same time. And I think one of his nominees for that was the Jesus and Mary Chain. And I kind of with singles like Upside Down and stuff, I see what he means there.
I think it's the well-trodden observation, frequently made observation that the Jesus and Mary Chain are a '60s sort of Phil Spector band with distortion turned up. It is just like Motown songs or Renette songs with distortion on. So, which is no problem. I love that shit. But
I suppose in a less noise terrorist way, but in its own way at the time, the same. It's what people said about the Ramones, right? I guess accurately.
Yeah. It's all just bubblegum pop with a bit of with a snarl.
Yeah,
which is fine with me.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think we'll come back to that when we talk about the White Album, actually, because obviously the White Album is full of sort of genre experiments from a 1968 perspective, and genre dabbling and mastery depending on the mood you're in, basically. But it's interesting. I wanted to, I suppose, just before we move on, because it's something about that 90s context of Beatles fandom, especially when you're a young person kind of working out what you like and what you don't. Because we touched on Britpop before. When I was looking into this, I haven't done a huge amount of research for this podcast because I didn't want to, apart from just re-listen to the album and reading up a little bit about the immediate context of its production, I didn't really want to get lost in the weeds. And I'd say I used to be a real Beatles sort of fanatic, and I've a lot of that's lapsed, but a lot of it's still buried. So hopefully I'm going to sort of reactivate some of the memories of things that I know there. One of the sources that makes him sound very scholarly. One of the books I read about the Beatles in the late 90s was Revolution in the Head by Ian MacDonald.
Ian MacDonald, yeah.
I
think I borrowed that off you and read it.
Yeah, it's quite, if you're a fan, it's quite the thing to go through, isn't it? It's a very musically informed, very kind of often quite opinionated sort of trawl track by track through the Beatles recording, with quite a bit of recording info, but also sort of a bit, takes on what the tracks mean and are trying to say and things like that. And it's funny, I was looking back on where the Beatles were at culturally in the mid-90s, and also, of course, you had those anthology programs coming out, didn't you?
Oh, yeah, they were great. I don't own that box set, but I borrowed it off a mate at school who was another Beatles nut, and watched it like a couple of times through. And I keep looking to see if it's online on any streaming service, but it's not, funnily enough.
Yeah, I had a look, and even Daily Motion seemed to be largely drawing a blank, except for I found a sort of 10-minute clip that's from one of the sort of later episodes, which is basically a bunch of the surviving Beatles talking about the first time they did acid, and like it's George Harrison driving them home from a nightclub very, very slowly, as the basically, it's kind of adorable, really, But I found I'd love to rewatch some of that. That's but that came out, and the anthology discs came out, with all the sort of alternate recordings and takes of work throughout the careers, and I was sort of coupling all that up as well at the same time as I was getting used to the albums, the mainstream albums as recorded, and I suppose culturally I was just thinking, because of Britpop and because of the nostalgia of people who were young then, and then we had like buying power and stuff in the 90s, we're probably at quite a different stage with Beatles fandom now, aren't we? Like, I mean, I was just thinking when you were saying about hearing Beatles songs on the radio all the time, that's almost something that I know we don't generally listen to radio in the same way we did in the 90s in general, but I was just thinking that's almost like, we've talked before about how like when we were kids there used to be just Laurel and Hardy shorts on TV all the time and stuff like that. That seems like a thing that probably doesn't really happen anymore, Well,
I don't know, because it was because the radio I listened to was not really, until I was a bit older, like Radio 1 or anything. It was like the Virgin Radio sort of Chris Evans that kind of thing, which was a mixture of aimed at middle-aged people anyway, who at that point would have been Beatles fans when they were kids, at a time when to be cool meant to, because of the Britpop, lad rock stuff, was to be backward looking and obsess over the Beatles. So I think it's a mixture of like I think that sort of radio station still exists. Like, well, it definitely does. Whenever I go home, my dad's listening to it. But I don't know whether the cultural climate's quite the same.
All right.
No, I was saying it's like last time I was back, I was on driving through the countryside where I'm from. And I don't know, She Loves You was on or something.
Yeah. I can imagine that still happens in the sort of Radio 2 sort of stations on down.
Yeah.
Kind of thing. Yeah. I suppose it's funny. We mentioned you touched on Oasis before. Like I can't remember what critic it was, but some critic sort of slightly snarkily said something comparing the Beatles to Oasis, and he basically said something along the lines of the Beatles' influences were music hall, Dada, Spike Milligan, the Bonzos, etc. Oasis,
the Tibetan Book of the Dead.
yeah, Eastern mysticism, that sort of thing. Whereas Oasis's influences are the Beatles, and I think that's actually quite. Far be it from me to be the defender of Oasis, but I think that's a bit unfair actually, because Oasis actually quite rarely sound like the Beatles.
They also the Beatles, they have two influences: the Sex Pistols and the Beatles.
Yeah, and arguably a bit of T-Rex.
Yes. But,
thrown in there.
Arguably, I don't know. There's not much. Okay, yeah, I'll give you that.
Well, they weren't. They were never successfully sued by the Beatles, whereas they were successfully sued by was it Coca-Cola or the people who what was the melody that Oasis like legally nicked? It was I'd Like to Teach the World to Sing, right? Whichever group did that, was it the New Seekers?
Oh yeah, I think that is the New Seekers.
Yeah, I think Oasis got. I think Shaker Maker was legally declared plagiaristic of that, which is pretty amusing.
Oh Christ! No, I didn't know anything about that. One of the reasons I sort of went off the Beatles and classic rock in my early teens, mid-teens, around that snippet, 16ish, was because I didn't really like Britpop, I didn't really like Oasis, and so it felt like me going on about the Beatles was part of the problem. So I
know what you mean.
I got into other I took a massive left turn and got into more punk.
Yeah. I know. I hear you. Actually, mentioning Oasis, I think I read. I'll try and source this, but I think I read somewhere when I was younger that the White Album, like Noel Gallagher, at some point declared that the White Album is his favourite, if not favourite album, his favourite Beatles album. Which
I heard that.
Yeah. I
ruins
feel,
it for you a bit, doesn't it?
A little bit, yeah. Because I'll get on. We'll get to the album proper in a sec. I think it might be mine, and it's the idea of having much in common with Noel Gallagher at all gives me kind of night terrors, I think.
I mean, maybe you can get away with it by saying there is so much on the White Album, and the fact that there is so much leads to there being so much to say about it, and find that you perhaps have found different things in it. I can't imagine. But basically, I imagine that Noel's favourite songs will not be the same as ours, and I imagine the things that I find charming about it, he will think are lame.
It's much like like all the great works of art, like Pingu, for example. You can find aspects in it that other people might not.
I was rewatching some Pingu the other day.
Were you? I've got well into rewatching Pingu.
I was watching it because a colleague of mine pointed out there's an episode where there's like a walrus pursuing them.
Oh, that's famous.
Like
Yeah, famously terrifying.
And it's I completely forgot about that, and then I couldn't quite believe it was as disturbing as she was saying. So she showed me, and it indeed is as disturbing as she was saying. And then I began watching more and more Pingu on the internet.
Yeah, it's great, isn't it? Like it's really well animated and creative and stuff.
Yeah.
I fell down a bit of a nostalgia hole with that as well. That and Alien vs Predator fan fiction.
Well, there's a Alien vs Predator versus Robbie the Seal as your next.
Whoever wins, we lose.
Merger. Yeah.
Did you ever see very brief sidebar? Then we will get to the White Album. Did you ever see that fan made sort of animation that has probably been online for about 10 years now? It's called Thingu, where it's the thing in the style of Pingu.
No, I've not seen that, but that seems like something that's now very obvious. Now you mention it, I'm glad someone's picked that low-hanging fruit.
Yeah, well, if you want to see, it sort of is, but it's lovingly done. If you want to see Pingu with a flamethrower, then that's
well, yeah, obviously
that's where you get it. Probably going in the show notes. Anyway, so yeah, the White Album. I just wanted to sort of, as I say, we won't really. I mean, I'm sure we'll touch on tracks here as we chat, but we'll get a bit more into that in the second half. So I suppose, like, sort of slightly crude question, like, where does the White Album stand for you in terms of favourite Beatles albums? Is it high up there?
yeah, it's high up there. It's not my favourite, and it's probably on account of it being so eclectic and so long. Frankly, it's not one that I have. Well, two things. One, it's not one that I listened to much when I was young, so it doesn't have the nostalgia. It's why I came to when I decided that I needed to get into the Beatles. It was not one we had at home on vinyl.
Right.
So I had to go when I was buying Beatles albums on CD as a teenager. I would have bought that. You know, I bought them in order, so it would have been like quite far down the line, and didn't listen to it as much as the others just because it was so long and it was hard to do. So I think I like it academically more than I like it like emotionally, which is a trite thing to say. That doesn't mean that there's. I don't think it's the most interesting. I think it probably is in the top 2 best Beatles albums, maybe top 3. But I think I find it more interesting than I do enjoyable.
Yeah. No, that's it.
But we're talking a Beatles level stuff here, so at the level of enjoyment, I still enjoy it tremendously.
Yeah, I see what you mean. Having to make any, I'm the same. Having to make any of these gradations is kind of somewhat ridiculous. It's funny actually, going right back, because I can't really remember time before I engaged with this album, at least a little bit. You know, even if it was just my dad playing me bits of it and stuff. But if I was coming to it fresh now as an adult, you know, let's say I didn't know very much about the Beatles at all, and I was, you know, just doing sort of culturally dutiful listen to through them, this would be the one where if I just heard about it, my heart would sink, because famously a lot of it was sort of, you know, a lot of the songs were written and kind of formulated initially on their retreat to the Maharishi Yogis resort thing, and that was in sort of early 1968, and then it seems like they spent most of the sort of middle and latter half of the year recording it back in London largely, and that just sounds insufferable, does it, as the formula for any album?
Yeah.
Going away on a hippie retreat and then and noodling around and then coming back and banging that into shape while you're all barely talking to each other. That does not sound like the recipe for a successful album, does it? And
it also basically has in the background, in the foreground, I should say, of its creation, all the things that I like least about the Beatles. Like saying, so one is the hippie stuff. All the mysticism, just, you know, on a retreat, like you say. John deciding that he's actually a serious artist, that always winds me up. And thinking that he's better than the others because he has an artist girlfriend.
I think we'll come back to talking about Yoko Ono.
Yeah, we'll come back to that. Yeah. George, who is, you know, getting properly into the religious stuff. And, you know, and I love George, but that's the thing that I find the hardest to, you know, relate to with him. And, you know, it's lots of Paul's, you know, sort of genre exercises in the uncool genres, which is actually, incidentally, is one of my favourite things about the Beatles. That's why I love Paul, because I like all that stuff.
Yeah. That's an element, and we'll get back to this, but that's an element that's aged better for me than from my teenage years, where I would have, in a typical teenage self-serious way, I would have dismissed a lot of the froth, almost, you know.
Yeah, I think I wanted to do that, but never could, because I had to reconcile with the fact that I really liked them, and I knew I did. Whereas I know a lot of my friends, other Beatles friends, their least favourite songs were all the lame, cheesy ones, because John said it's all granny music shit. And I knew I didn't quite believe that, and knew I didn't really like John very much. Even though, having looked at my list I've made here, it's very John heavy. But also knowing that this band that you love, and that you like to have a very, very sort of firm image of in your head as being like four mates who could have been your mates, becoming the best band in the world, and you know they're falling apart, and you know that they hate each other, and you know that this isn't really one band's album. It's like, it's a Frankenstein's monster of neuroses and ego.
Yeah. It is. I was actually an obvious. We'll talk a bit about Kid A in a second, because I think there's some interesting differences and similarities there. But I was thinking, you know, not to imply that Radiohead were going to break up, and certainly they didn't. But the other thing I was thinking you could compare it to in terms of naughty's stuff is the Outcast album. You know, the Love Below Speaker
double
Box,
one,
which is
the
double album where it's basically 2 solo albums. You know, because obviously for a duo that's almost like the nearest equivalent. Because I was reading up about this about the White Album, and I think it says that the Beatles as a quartet only appear on half the tracks.
I think it's 16 tracks. So I was reading this the other day as well.
Yeah, which is I mean, you can hear that. I think I was kind of aware, even before I knew more of the biographical stuff, listening to it as a teenager. I think I was aware that a lot of the tracks are more Spartan and sort of idiosyncratic. And, you know, obviously this is some time after the Beatles had stopped. Well, quite considerable time after the Beatles had stopped performing live, really, wasn't it? You know, they weren't they hadn't been touring for a good few years now, had they?
I forget when they stopped touring, about 65, 66, 64, 65?
Yeah,
65,
sort of
I think.
circa Rubber Soul, sort of like that.
Yeah,
kind of,
I think before Rubber Soul.
Yeah.
But like that's because like so many of the songs do feel like demos in a lot of like, which can be a charming thing about it, because you do see behind the curtain a little bit, but you can imagine them being, like you say, Spartan. So there's not much room for a band performing.
Yeah,
but that's one thing I probably came to terms with, that I knew academically coming into this, but probably wrestled with in doing this exercise that you got me to do, is how few like, quote unquote proper songs there are on the album. Like I got to the end of my initial run of 15 and thought, actually there aren't any songs here. They're just this is 15 fragments of songs, but I sorted that out.
Well, that's interesting. The way you
fixed the Beatles.
Yeah, what we've done is improve the whole album. When you talk about fragments of songs, it's interesting, isn't it? Because there's a few things going on there. I think this is maybe something to talk about more in the second half, but I think there's tons of ways in which the White Album does point forward to the actual solo careers that the Beatles had. I think there's a lot of templates for the roads they choose to travel there, basically, in these, and some specific tracks that point the way more than others. But I was thinking also, you kind of, the rest of what would be the Beatles' career, the sort of chaos of that is sown here, isn't it? Because you get things like, I mean, like the long medley on Abbey Road is an easy example, right? Which is almost like a sort of what we now think of as like a DJ curated version of of the White Album, so like done again, with all these different genres like puddling into each other. And I mean they actually, it's funny, like I think that they themselves saw bits of this later stage of their career as almost like clearing out the attic, right? Like just using up loads of songs. And I think by the Abbey Road particularly, it was just like, well, we know we're not really sticking around in this much longer, and we're just going to get all this stuff out there,
Yeah, I think that's why they insisted on being a double album, despite the record company and George Martin not wanting them to. It was just a clear out of stuff. And I mean, there are even songs which are 3 songs glued together. Like "Happiness Is a Warm Gun" is just 3 songs.
Yeah, actually,
3 different songs glued together. Well, it sounds to me like it is anyway.
And "Happiness Is a Warm Gun," I think, is one that could be on that. That could be a part of the long medley on Abbey Road. I think like that. Yeah. It feels very much like, as you say, or it could be several parts of the long medley on Abbey Road. Yeah, there's a lot of that going on, and I think the sort of solo feel of a lot of the tracks. I mean, I wasn't quite. I think I used to know this, but I was reading up a bit about Revolution 9, which we'll get to. But I hadn't quite realised how much that was, John and Yoko co-creation for the most part.
Yeah, because I know that there was some beef with Paul, surprise, about Paul not being able to contribute on it in any way.
Apparently. Yeah, I think he actually left the studio, didn't he? And Yoko basically co-wrote, produced it basically, and advised on the technical aspects and things like that. It's which is something I did you read that thing? I don't think I ever knew this, but before this, did you see that thing where George Martin basically went on holiday in the middle of this album? Yeah,
no, I read about that. Yeah, but I think I'd known about that because I think it's one of the things I remembered from the anthology, is that there's that he just packed up and went on holiday for a bit because it essentially seemed like an odd thing. It seemed like a funny incident.
Yeah,
of going, fuck this, I'm going on holiday.
Well, it made me think of that. Is it Big Train, that sketch about George Martin?
Oh yeah. When he will no matter what he's asked, he'll always only talk about the Beatles.
Yeah, it just made me think of that version of George Martin, basically.
There's a bit in I can't remember. It's in Garth Marenghi. It's either in the actual show of Garth Marenghi or it's in the additional interviews that they did with Todd Rivers. That's Matt Berry, talking about how his girlfriend doesn't put up with any shit. And he's like, she was very angry with me because I called her father a thief, which in fact he is. And the next morning, she came in and she threw scorching hot coffee on me. Now, most men would have gone through the roof, but I got up, put my trousers on, and I went on holiday. And since then, she's been fine.
Yeah, there we go. It's amazing how in talking about disparate subjects, the Garth Marenghi DVD additional materials come up more than once on this podcast.
Oh, has it really? Is that from me each time?
No, I don't think it even was. No, I think George has maybe mentioned it, but it was. It's good. Oh, so great. It's funny. It's a weird link. The sort of framing of Garth Marenghi's Dark Place owes, now that I think about it, I never thought about this before, owes something to those Beatles anthology shows, doesn't it?
Oh yes, like getting the original contributor back together to reminisce. Yeah,
Yeah,
it does.
or more often separately, right? And kind of like, contradicting each other and talking over each other, and things like, I don't see it as a problem, things like that.
Yeah,
Something I can imagine Paul saying, of the anthology things. Yeah, it's you're talking about being a Sergeant Pepper nut first and foremost, or at least chronologically that's how you came to them. I think I remember being very fascinated as an adolescent with this phase in the Beatles' career, like everything from the Sergeant Pepper, peak, let's say, lazily. I know you can define that loads of different ways, but just the slide, the sort of collapse of them as this imperial cultural force. Basically, I find something really fascinating about that, and it's not really. I don't think that's a sort of innate interest in what you might call psychedelia in me, anyway. It's kind of you could debate that for ages because I was actually, one thing I was doing today in preparing for this was there's a few bits of like late 60s music that I'm a bit vaguer on, and what I mean is like big sort of canonical planks of sort of 60s music, like what the Beach Boys were up to at this time, and what the Rolling Stones were up to. Like, for instance, I've never been a Rolling Stones album fan. There's loads of Rolling Stones singles I really like, but I've never really dived into their albums in the same way that I've dived into the Beatles albums. So I was having to look up today that, for instance, in summer '68, Beggar's Banquet comes out, which has Sympathy for the Devil on it, and actually has a really I don't think I'd ever known this. It has Beggar's Banquet, at least the cover it finally came out in, has a really stark white cover with minimal text on it.
Yeah, just the cursive text saying Beggar's Banquet.
Yeah, which is apparently not what they wanted. They wanted like a sort of graffiti-strewn toilet photo, basically. But but that got put up, and that's actually like 4-5 months before the White Album ends up coming out. So I was kind of like, that's interesting. You don't usually think, maybe this is just our Beatles fandom, but you don't usually think of the Rolling Stones influencing the Beatles rather than the other way around, do you?
Well, maybe it was just coincidence then, because the Stones didn't want that to happen, and the Beatles definitely did want a white album, and to contrast with Sgt. Pepper's, then maybe the Stones were ahead of the game by accident on this case. But my colours are nailed to the mast there, so maybe I'm not the most reliable arbiter.
Yeah, no, I'm the same. I was wondering actually, because I remember this is probably from Revolution in the Head originally that I read this, but at an early stage of planning it or preparing for the release, I hear the Beatles, the White Album, was going to be called A Doll's House, to sort of reflect. I don't know which Beatle came up with that idea, but it was sort of to reflect the idea of it being 30 different rooms, basically, with this weird stuff going on. Which I kind of love that, and I think since I read that, I've always kind of thought of that in the back of my head as being a sort of unofficial title for it. Have you ever read anything about why they basically just gave up, you might say, and called it the Beatles? Have you ever read any take on that?
No, I've not. It seems an odd time to go into sort of the self-mythology mode when you're falling apart,
doesn't it?
So no, I don't know. It's odd. If you try thinking about it, called A Doll's House, and imagine listing all the Beatles albums that you love and getting to. Then there's A Doll's House. Then there was Abbey Road. Well, Magical, whatever comes next, Your Submarine. Yeah, that seems quite a nice title. Better than the Beatles, but no one calls it the Beatles anyway.
No,
the White Album's album's a good name.
You can't see the title. Yeah. So, did you ever listen? I want to talk a second about Kid A in a minute before we break for the second half. But just briefly, did you ever engage much with the Grey album that came out in the early mid-noughties? I'm talking about the Danger Mouse.
Your Danger Mouse thing.
Hip hop mashup of the Black Album by Jay-Z and the White Album instrumentals.
No, I didn't, and not because I objected to the White Album being touched. It's just I was. What year did that come out? About 2005-ish?
I think maybe 4, something like that. Maybe.
Yeah, so I was kind of stuck in a guitar stuff only frame of thinking for a bit there. I think I was still a bit sniffy about hip hop generally, which took me far too long to get over, but it did happen eventually. But at that point, I don't think I'd have been listening to anything that wasn't, guitar stuff really, with exception. But yeah, I know I didn't listen to it. It's a long way of saying that.
It's funny, I didn't listen to it that much either at the time, and I was, I think it's fair to say more into hip hop than yourself, and certainly more into mashup culture and stuff like that. Through various other interests off the back of Soul Wax and their imitators and all that sort of stuff. But I just really didn't like Jay-Z. That was the thing. Like, not in any, I hadn't read anything bad about him or anything. I just I didn't dislike him on that level or anything. I found his lyrics and music for the most part just really unengaging, and kind of I was much more into the sort of more what I saw as sort of experimental and wacky kind of like Outkast and Missy Elliott and that kind of stuff. And I saw Jay-Z as a bit of an old, I suppose, like an old 90s hangover from a less interesting age, really. So it was, despite being a Beatles fanatic, I probably gave the Grey Album like a couple of cursory listens through. I was re-listening to it last week while I was going for a walk, and it's kind of there's some good bits. I think they do like Dirt Off Your Shoulder to like, but yeah, I think I'm going to give that more of a re-listen later. But yeah, I just wanted to talk about Kid A. So the reason I talked about this is funny actually, because when we did Hail to the Thief, we ended up talking almost like in a mirror about Kid A, because we couldn't like directly address it. You had to kind of like talk about it at a distance, and I feel like we're going to do the same thing again here a little bit. But the reason I wanted to bring it up is, so when Kid A came out in 2000, I was 15. I think I just turned 15, and I was definitely probably at the peak of my Beatles fanaticism and fandom and stuff. So whilst also discovering music for my generation and that moving much more into that, and Kid A was a seminal album for me, and I know for yourself in tons of ways. But it's certainly the headspace I was then. I was very much thinking of it in terms of the White Album, and it was because it was, I think a lot of the press Radiohead were doing for it at the time was sort of very much putting to the forefront their influences and the fact that they were trying out all these different genres and all these different tips of hats to artists that they liked and revered. And we've touched on some of this, I think, in the Hail to the Thief podcast. And the other thing, of course, is if you put Kid A together with Amnesiac, which came out the following year, you do get a sort of double album, don't you? You get a sort of post hoc double album, which
I think that's how they think of it as well.
Well, and it's sort of from the same sessions and stuff, right? As well,
yeah,
isn't it? So
yeah, and they've re-released it recently as one, as Kid Amnesiac.
Oh, that's right. I forgot that happened.
Yeah. It's basically Kid A and Amnesiac as they were released in one package with some stuff at the end.
That's right. Yeah, yeah. So
it's good because it's still the same sessions, so it's good stuff.
In the same way that we have, it sounds like they basically. I was going to say in the same way that we're trying to cut down the White Album to one album. You could attempt to push those together again as one album. But I'd forgotten that they themselves have basically done that.
Yeah, and I mean it doesn't quite work because. There's two versions of Morning Bell across the two albums.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to think if there's an equivalent. It's like Wild Honey Pie and Honey Pie, but they're not the same.
Well, I mean, there's two tracks called Revolution as well. There's
but they're quite. Yeah, I suppose
they're not the same track. But,
they're not the same.
Yeah. Well, there are those two. There are two released versions of Revolution or Revolution 1, depending on with Revolution 1 being the slower stoned version, basically.
The one I prefer.
Yeah, Well, we'll get onto that. I was re-listening to that today. I should say, as we go into discussion of the tracks in a minute, I actually re-listened to the White Album just before we started recording, so it's quite a lot of it's fresh in the mind, which is good fun. I wanted to ask you something specific about the Kid A White Album thing. When I listened to Kid A for the first time and was impressed by pretty much all of it, I and still am. I got to the end. I got to Motion Picture Soundtrack, and because I was in the midst of Beatles fanaticism, it instantly reminded me of Good Night.
Well, it's got that sort of lullaby effect, particularly when there's sort of that sort of string swell at the end, with then the sort of raining effect of the that tinkle. Yeah, it didn't spring to my mind, but I can see what you heard. I can hear what you heard.
I saw that as almost a tribute because I think the other comparison that didn't occur to me at the time, but I've read since, is that Motion Picture Soundtrack sounds a bit like Anchor Song by Björk, and I see that, I hear that now, but at the time it was definitely Good Night, and I think that was one of the things I liked about the ending of Kid A was it was like this, almost like solidifying Radiohead's status as the band of the moment to end something in such a White Album-ish way, of this sort of like weirdly cozy pastiche lullaby, as you say. I just kind of appreciated that.
Yeah. I was never listening to Kid A with the Beatles in mind. I don't know. I don't think I quite. I think maybe it was because I was trying to get away from, stupidly, because you can't get away from this. The sense that that the past loomed over my generation's, my generation's bands like the Beatles, like Radiohead being the band who are taking their influences from electronica and dance music and some jazz and stuff, as opposed to the old stodgy rock and roll. That would have been at the time when I was least into the Beatles, was when I was properly into Kid A, Amnesiac, Hail to the Thief, because I probably was intentionally not listening for any Beatles influence in there.
Well, it's probably healthiest
if you can intentionally not listen for something.
It's probably healthiest in a way, isn't it? Or certainly most stimulating and exciting if in your late teens or early 20s or whenever you most engage with the music that's coming out in your era. It's probably helpful if you can sort of slightly brush aside those tastes of your parents' generations, even if just temporarily, and properly engage with it. Right?
At least delude yourself that this is, my year's era. Yeah, of course it is.
Yeah. Well, I mean, yeah, it's funny. Obviously the careers don't map onto each other in any sort of really meaningful way. But I was having talked about Hail to the Thief, you could sort of see that as Radiohead's White Album as well. Because we talked at the time about how that is a bit sprawling and a bit kind of overstuffed and it has just a bunch of stuff going on in different directions. Whereas Kid A feels somehow more focused, even though it's actually playing around with quite a lot of different musical elements.
Well, Kid A might be more like the sort of Revolver or Sgt. Pepper's then, the sort of statement of intent of a new way of doing things.
Yeah.
A new wave, a new set, new ideas from different genres. So yes, we've done rock and roll till this point, but we like musical, we like Indian music, and Kid A is being, yes, we like rock and roll, but we also like electronica, ambient, jazz.
Yeah.
And people, a lot of the mainstream press going, that's not cool, don't do that.
Yeah.
And then Hail to the Thief being the White Album equivalent of the, like I say, it's a bit more sprawling, a bit more.
Yeah. I think what's there at least is the intent, linked intent in me getting you to talk about them, because I think I asked you to talk about Hail to the Thief with me and Matt partly because there seemed more point in talking about it rather than just rhapsodizing Kid A, which I think we say in the podcast. But I would feel the same way about asking you to talk about Sgt. Pepper. It would just feel a bit ridiculous.
Yeah. I wouldn't have much to say apart from to defend it from people I think are quite boring rock fans who don't like the When I'm 64s and the Little Help from My Friends and all that stuff, which I do like.
Yeah. Oh, it's funny, we talk a bit more about this in the second half, but I was going to ask you a question about that. You saying With a Little Help from My Friends just reminded me. I meant to ask you this in advance, but can you think of any really good Beatles cover versions? Because it was in listening through to this.
I can straight away. Marmalade's cover of Obla Di Obla Da. I'm of course joking.
Which will of course play out this podcast at the end. That's not a commitment. Because I was thinking an obvious one that came up when we'll talk about the track is Dear Prudence. That has that I think really good.
Oh, didn't Susie? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, that's a good one. I can think of some covers of Lennon solo stuff. I've got a soft spot for Brian Ferry's Jealous Guy, but that's that's not a Beatles song.
That's not admissible. Yeah. It's funny because a lot of people. It's funny when you mentioned Little Help from My Friends.
The Joe Cocker version.
A lot of people like the Joe Cocker version. Yeah. It's earlier. I think it was last year actually. I got Disney Plus and I was watching through a lot of the old Muppet shows.
Yes. Yeah. I watched a few of those. Yeah.
Yeah. So they have Floyd from the Electric Mayhem do a version of While My Guitar Gently Weeps, sitting on like a fire escape in one, which is fine. But then they have an amazing cover version. I'll find a link and send it to you. But they have an amazing cover version of With a Little Help from My Friends. That's like Janice from the Electric Mayhem singing it, but it's like in the middle of a temple with loads of like drumming going on and like tribal drumming and stuff. It's amazing.
So not for the first time the Muppets take a classic and improve on it.
yeah, the definitive version of Treasure Island, for example.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, I was thinking of Christmas Carol, but yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I think we'll break there because I do want to talk to you more specifically about the tracks, and the way we'll do that is we'll go through them in order, and we'll talk about. We'll sort of do the list that we've made at the same time. So we'll talk about, for each track, whether we both included it, whether one of us has and one of us hasn't. And there might be a few even where we both decided to cut them. Well, there almost certainly will be, I think. but that, yeah, we'll do that. We'll take a little brief break, and then we'll be back to chat that.
We were making the Beatle White album, and there was a period where, because it was a double album, it started, splitting into, like Paul would be in one studio doing something and somebody else would be in another studio. There was a lot of overdubs, and there was a lot of time when, I wasn't required. Or sometime I was in one studio doing the horn section on Savoy Truffle, all that.
Right, here we go. Here we go, lads. We're not really what we make out to be. That's all I can say.
I'll just be singing to guide you. 2, 3, 4. In the stars is all the backing folk.
Was that better than the one before?
Oh, one bad bit on behalf of me, sir.
Another one?
One bad bit in that one.
Hey?
A bad bit. It wasn't a break, so I got a bit.
Take 19.
Have extra on the first one, please. Help scale. Hello. Even though I may not be singing it moving along.
I think that's got it. I think we've got something there, George.
The F sharp minor sounded out of tune.
Come on now. It's time you little toddlers were in bed. I'm having no more messing. You've been out to the park all day, you've had a lovely time. Now it's time for bed. Are we ready? Daddy'll sing a song. Now it's time. It was me.
Do that again. Are we ready to sing the song?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the money to get the children out of my... 1, 2, 3. Who knows how long...
Can you turn it down in my cans a bit?
Say Las Vegas too. I'll make a nice view.
Hello? Okay.
Welcome back to the show. So, Rich, what we're going to do now is we're going to work through the tracks of the White Album in the order that they're on the actual album, but we're also going to talk a little bit about whether you and I have included them respectively in our sort of cut in half of the White Album down to 15 tracks, and I guess we'll sort of naturally end up talking a little bit more about the ones where we differ.
Can I raise a what I thought was a rule of our exercise?
Yeah, definitely.
I thought that we weren't allowed to move things around, so you could cut tracks, but you couldn't move a track above. You couldn't change the order.
Yeah. So, for example, let's say you cut out track 7. Your album then goes from what is actually track 6 to track 8.
Yeah. So, which is how I played it, because actually that leads to one of the most heart-wrenching omissions. Anyway, we'll talk about that when we get to it. But I think I want to make sure that definitely was true.
Yeah, we both followed the same rules in that respect, I think. So we're good. We're good. Okay, so I just briefly about the way I went about this. I did a quick re-listen a few weeks ago, and then I had an initial cull, and I got it. I think more quicker than I thought. I got it down to about 20, and then my list of 20 basically sat on the shelf for about a week and a half. And then I think I had a few drinks and listened to it again, and I was just like, and I did some quite what to me felt like very vicious cutting of like another 5, and it all came together quite quickly. But I also have regrets, basically. I have some things I cut out that I'm amazed I cut out, basically.
So what I did was I basically listened to it a few weeks ago and ranked all the songs.
Right.
Just a cold ranking. Listened to it again, made a few changes, and then basically filled it in that way so that all the top 15 tracks are arranged in in whatever order that they are now. But then that led to a couple of fairly unsatisfying things about it that I didn't think quite worked. Like basically made it either not quite a Beatles album, like in my vague definition of what that is, but also, or maybe just missed out some of the, for want of a less wanky word, sort of flavours of the album.
Yeah.
So then made some very arbitrary readmissions and culls. Okay, not arbitrary, but some more less procedural.
Yes, yeah. No, I'll be interested to see what you mean by that in a way, because I think I can think of some of the sort of ones that you'd readmit to make it feel like more of a Beatles album. Again, whatever that means. we're in uncharted waters here. Okay, so starting off the album, so the album obviously kicks off with Back in the USSR. I'll say hit or miss. That's how we'll do this. So it's a hit if you include it.
Okay, so if by this very restrictive version of a hit and miss, it is a miss for me. Yeah. But it's easily the hardest one. It's one of my looking at my list of like just favorite tracks on the album. It's in my top 10. But if we're making culls, I think for a reason we'll discuss in the next. Basically, I think the next track is a better way to start the album.
Right.
So I missed it off, and it hurts me because I love Back in the USSR.
Yeah.
My first ever band, the first song we ever covered was Back in the USSR.
Oh wow, that's so great because this is a hit for me, and I think this is going to lead to some interesting differences in what we've done here, because we talked, didn't we? I was opining that like Back in the USSR, Dear Prudence, and Glass Onion are all kind of great opening tracks in slightly different ways, and they almost like deliberately from different eras in the way they sort of work and stuff. And actually, one thing we didn't mention when we talk about the album as a whole is that it's then fairly it was fairly innovative. Was the way that the White Album tracks actually do flow into each other. That was quite a new thing,
Yeah, but they had done that before, like to some extent at the beginning of Sgt. Pepper's before they bailed on it. So the way Sgt. Pepper's goes into Little Help from My Friends when they were still playing with the whole like concept album thing before they bailed. So
yeah, and the Sgt. Pepper reprise goes into A Day in the Life somewhat, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But this is it gives it a real kind of cohesiveness to this album that as we said before, could feel extremely almost like militantly non-cohesive, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But there's bits and pieces in the choices to come where I've actually chosen things because, although they flow masterfully into each other on the actual album, I think it's a cool effect if one track instead flows into another track.
There are moments on this on the actual album proper before we culled it where a track goes into the next one, and I used to think it was it feels like it's the same song going somewhere else, and you go, this song has just rapidly improved. What a great track this is! What a great change of direction. And then you look, it's actually a different song.
Did you? I know we're both Beach Boys fans to an extent. I was a bit of a Beach Boys fan even when I first listened to this, and I took it. I suppose if you're a Beach Boys fan, you could take Back in the USSR a few ways, couldn't you? Because you could actually feel a little bit slighted by it because it's like a lot of things. We'll get into this. Like a lot of things, it's a pastiche kind of bit. It's a loving pastiche. I feel.
Yeah, it's a kind of piss take of the sort of jingoism. Jingoism's too strong a word, but of some of the Beach Boys kind of early American, like California Girls being aren't Americans the best? Yeah. But also, I thought it was fairly brave of an album of a band who are. I mean, to be fair, I say brave. They're the most famous people in the world. They can do what they like. But doing a song about how great they want to go back to the USSR when so many American conservatives were saying that they were communist infiltrators.
Yeah.
And then doing a song about sort of slightly fan those flames slightly.
Yeah, there might have been a bit of impishness in that, right? In the I mean, the kind of. I think we might touch in a couple of these songs how whether these tracks get political or not, because obviously in 1968 it's a very charged year for that kind of thing, and for I'm thinking of things like the line about Chairman Mao in Revolution 1 and things like that. It's very light touch political as an album, I think, and actually I believe some of the music press, some of the more sort of like serious music, self-serious music press at the time, criticised them for that, almost like for sitting out 1968 and not having a statement about it,
Yeah, I mean, although I would very rarely say this about John Lennon. The Chairman Mao line actually is sort of fairly grown up for 1968, where most of the other counterculturals are everything about the West sucks, and and if that means me making political bedfellows with monstrous human beings, and so be it, because I live in a one-dimensional world.
Yeah.
Saying something as kind of fence city as you want revolution, but don't be a dick about it.
Well, I like the Chairman Mao joke itself, just boiling their politics down to if you're a card-carrying Maoist, you probably won't get laid.
yeah.
I like the sort of, in a way, that's just a detachment. It's not judging the politics. It's just that's probably not going to work for you.
You can count him out.
Yeah, but anyway, so back in the USSR, love it. I've included it, and I know you love it too. This is the caveat I'm putting against all of these, but I think it's a great opening track because it's a sort of I feel like it's more of a mission statement opener than Dear Prudence, because it's to an extent setting down the tracks of how bizarre and out there and kooky the album's going to be.
I mean, just to make it absolutely clear, if I could change the order, this would definitely be in my 15.
Let's take that as read for almost all the tracks.
Okay, sure. Do you not think that the sort of Dear Prudence has some of that as well, with its whole come out to play vibe, and it sort of gently opens itself up, which is most Beatles albums do begin with a bang.
Yeah. Well, I feel like we've waltzed into talking about Dear Prudence here. So track 2, Dear Prudence. So hit or miss.
Yeah, that's on. That's the opening track of my version.
Okay. I've missed it. I've cut it out, and actually, I'm really interested because I really get what you're saying there about it sort of playful tone. Because one of my useless bits of Beatles memory is that this was written at the retreat. Was it in an attempt to coax Mia Farrow's sister out of a bad
Mia Farrow's sister out of something like that. Yeah, or she just wasn't. She was in her room all the time.
Yeah,
and didn't come out to play. Yay!
Yeah. So it's that. I mean, Dear Prudence is obviously really beautiful and a really lovely song and really well produced and everything. I wanted to sort of bring you up on you both mentioned that you had quite a lot of Lennon tracks on this, Lennon-led tracks or created tracks on this, and also that you basically don't buy into a lot of the kind of hippie vibe of that is part of the Beatles. How do you justify Dear Prudence as an opener? You already partly have.
Okay, so there has to. I mean, there's going to. Okay, let me start again. By virtue of how the album was composed, mainly on acoustic guitars somewhere in India, blah blah blah, there's going to be inevitably, if you want to capture any of the sense of the album at all, there's going to be some of that on it. And I think it's one of the less egregious of the. I think it's not super. I just think it's perhaps its prettiness overrides the fact that I know it was written by some millionaires who are high in India.
I mean, it is just lovely. I mean, that's the thing. There's obviously there's no such thing as objectively lovely, but it's very melodic and light, isn't it? And very,
Yeah, I just sort of like the way that it begins with just the gentle, I can't sing, but little arpeggios. Again, rather than a bang, and then just sort of fairly gradually builds for and that's not very common for a Beatles album opener.
It's also not preachingly or swaggeringly kind of hippie-ish in a way, is it? Like it's delicate.
It's not one of those. It's not one of the Lennon lectures about if you only just let me tell you how it is kind of songs, which those are the ones I object to. I imagine.
Well, yeah.
But
I suppose it's funny you go back to the childishness of some of the things in this album. I don't mean that judgmentally. I mean just kind of the qualities of childhood and stuff that come out to play as like the ultimate inclusive statement, really, isn't it? If you're talking about some sort of utopian ideals or whatever, coming out to play is the starting point for any of that.
Yeah, and the way that the song does expand and has the come out to play thing as its central sort of theme. and everything's beautiful, and so are you. I don't know. I think it's a nice handhold into the fairly old world we're about to be in for the next hour and a half. Oh, well, in my version, half that.
yeah, of course. Well, straight into track 3 then. Glass Onion, hit or miss?
This made it, but I think it was like a last minute change. I think basically thinking that, so going from the fairly gentle opener of my then into a sort of bit of a banger, that felt like a nice change. I do quite like some of the sort of self-referential stuff to the all the earlier Beatles songs.
Yeah, The Walrus was Paul, most famously.
The Walrus was Paul was the most famous bit, and the funniest bit.
That's sort of trolling before trolling, really, isn't it?
Yeah, and but also the little Full on the Hill recorder bit. That always makes me laugh. It's by no means one of my favourite songs on the album. I think basically I thought that one you were saying earlier, like some of the songs don't feel like full songs, like full finished songs. This one does. It feels like it's got a structure. It lasts the same amount of time as a normal pop song. Yeah. I thought maybe it's a sort of a steadying influence, and it's still a bit of a banger. So yeah, I put it on.
It's interesting you should describe it that way. Like I was thinking about Glass Onion because I've included it too. I don't know if I said that, but so in my album it goes straight from Back of the USSR to Glass Onion, which I sort of saw as almost like the nearest thing to an abrupt, like, okay, we're doing the proper album now moment, and one of the few ones. And I was actually thinking that maybe Glass Onion's one of the few tracks on the album that isn't a kind of muck about. Would it like lyrically, thematically, if you want to be that grandiose about it, it is a muck about. And it's meta and all that sort of stuff, but it's sort of the Beatles doing a straight. This is what the Beatles now sound like track, isn't it?
Yeah, like it could be it could accompany I'm the Walrus, or it could accompany Strawberry Fields or something like that. But but a rockier version. It could have been on Magical Mystery Tour. Like it has that sort of feel.
Well, I was saying, I don't know if any of you agree with this, because obviously I know you're into loads of like mid 70s, like Roxy Music, Eno, stuff like that, and obviously going into the later 70s, like Wire and things like that. Do you think there's a way in which Glass Onion sounds like almost like a version of what the Beatles might have sounded like in the 70s? Because I think there's, to my less trained ears than yours, that it sounds like it's got qualities of that sort of mid 70s art rock to it.
I suppose it sort of stomps in a fairly glammy way.
The brusqueness of it as well, I suppose. It's just kind of
I think I can't hear it as anything other than a Beatles song. Like it's the kind of song that I can just imagine them playing in their sort of like late 60s big fur coats when they had the moustaches and the wee glasses. So I can't see anyone in a sort of Brian Ferry suit singing Glass Onion.
I think the Wire thing, I'm literally just thinking I might just be getting the brevity, because I've got the running times in front of me here and I see that it's barely crests 2 minutes really.
Oh really? Wow.
Yeah, but it's solid pick, and the first one we both picked as well. So that's
yeah. The other thing that I'm reluctant to put it on is that I begin with a run of John songs, whereas you've started with a Paul into a John, so you've already got the two heads of the Beatles, established, and it's a bit of a while for mine, which I'm looking at it now, I don't really like.
Well, you've got a chance to amend that next. Track 4, Obladi Oblada.
I did not put Obladi Oblada on, although having listened to it, whenever I get to it, I go, oh shit, this is going to be like Obladi, and it's famous, like no one likes Obladi Oblada, right? But blah blah blah. It was not as bad as I remembered. It's still not great. And it's really low on the list of like just the straightforward the order of ranking the songs.
I think we're not the right people to get into the sort of racial politics of Obladi, although I've actually listened to a whole podcast that was just about that.
No, but that was the other thing that I was properly bracing myself for was I sort of remembered it being worse in quite a few ways than it was. I thought that he put on a proper cod Jamaican accent for it, and he doesn't really.
Yeah, that's sort of his reputation almost, isn't it? It's almost like a Sting type thing, But
but he doesn't really.
No, there's a sort of patronising, ska fandom romanticism about it, isn't there? But probably not in a way that's aged very well.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I don't mind him, copying on the just a different genre of music. He's always done that. But if you're going to do a ska song, singing a sort of fairly patronising story about people in the marketplace and having a singer in a band is a tad infantilising. But more than that, it's a fairly boring song.
I was going to say, I think it's infantilising because weirdly in the Beatles songbook at this stage, it's not weird enough. Like it's not got the weird psychedelia of like Lovely Rita or even Penny Lane and stuff. You know,
it's one of the ones where you get the impression that he's heard a kind of music, some ska music, and has, unusually for Paul, not really quite got what makes that music powerful or emotive in any way.
Yeah,
he's picked out the strumming patterns and the offbeat rhythm, but not really anything that makes it atmospheric. But then not added anything to it, like they're saying with Lovely Rita or something like that. He's not taken it as a starting place and made a Paul song. It's like somebody who hasn't just doesn't have a really good idea about what he's doing with that song.
Yeah.
But again, I actually, like I say, I didn't hate it as much as I thought as I seem to remember my hating it.
Yeah.
But it was ranked low.
Yeah. But
I did not make it.
I've not included it either. I should say, I wasn't sure whether to mention this here or in Savoy Truffle, but when we talk later. But there's that line in Savoy Truffle where George, isn't it, on that? He's like, "We all know, oh blah dee blah da," and I was like, that's weird because it's doing the Glass Onion thing, but it's doing it for a track that's just
that we all knew about an hour ago.
Yeah, which is a weird flex, isn't it? I wonder if that's, I've never read an interpretation of that, but I wonder if that's literally just George expressing that he was sick of hearing "oh bloody blah da" in the rehearsals.
I think that "Oh bloody da" is one of the more fraught songs. I think they for some reason, Paul wanted to get it absolutely perfect, as if it's his masterpiece on the record.
Like Stanley Kubrick.
Yeah, and I think they did like hundreds of takes, and for a song that no one else was really that into. So I can imagine, yes, with what George meant with "we all had obladi oblada."
Ah, right, yeah. That's probably what it was.
And or maybe he foresaw the Marmalade cover, which we have mentioned already, which was we got to number 1. Interesting fact. I think this is true, that Marmalade were the first Scottish band to be number 1
in the UK singles chart.
In the UK, yeah.
That's fascinating. I'm definitely going to fact check that.
I'm worried it's bullshit, but I remember being told that by somebody who I blame them.
Everything on podcasts is innately true. That's what I go with. So number 5, Wild Honey Pie. I have this. I've included this.
I like it. It's fairly low down on my list because it makes me laugh, and it's fine, and it's funny, but it is quite slight.
Yeah, of course.
It is a one-note joke, pretty much, and I love a one-note joke. My whole life is basically a one-note joke, but I thought that if I have to cut this down to 15 songs, I'll get some content in.
Yeah.
I do know that that comes at a cost of some colour to the album and some of its charm, but that was part of why this game was hard.
Well, I must admit, so I can defend it in the sense that I just love the wackiness of it, and I love the way it keeps the energy of the album going, and I love that sort of springy sort of sound to it, but I mean, a large part of the reason this is on is kind of looking forward is just, I told you that my introduction to the Pixies was the Live at the BBC CD where they start off by covering this in a session.
Oh, right, yeah.
So I'll just never be able to unhear that echoing back to it,
Well, like I said, I've got it down to 14. As I said at the beginning of this thing, and there is a space. I think we'll need that space later on, but for now, let's put that in then.
Yeah, we'll talk about that. The other thing is, I'd never really thought about, you talk about it being slight and but charming. It's sort of a, what is it trying to sound like? Because I'd never really thought about this before. It always just exists on its own term. But I was like, is it a sort of campfire sing along sort of spiritual in a sense? I was thinking.
I just thought it was some people dicking about.
It's the way, I think it was particularly their vocals. I was like, the way they do the vocals, the sort of the trillingness of it, sort of. I was like, is that meant to sound like old sort of spiritual songs? Or I was just trying. I'd never really thought seriously about what it's a pastiche of.
I mean, is it a pastiche of anything, or is it just a bit where? So, for example, having watched the Beatles Peter Jackson documentary thing, you can imagine them just sitting around, and then suddenly someone starts playing something and starts singing it, and they just go with it and try and make it as silly as possible for a bit. That's how I always imagined it. It was just some people, they were just fucking about.
It's interesting that it's twinned with Honey Pie, isn't it? Like nominally, like it's kind of because that is just straightforwardly a your mother should know type
music halls.
Yeah. Okay, so track 6, the continuing story of Bungalow Bill. I was actually surprised that this is one that I had to listen back to. I didn't remember very well, really. I remember the shouty, repetitive chorus and stuff, but I actually, in listening back to it, it was one of the ones where I was like, oh yeah, this has all these bits, Like,
this one was a sort of strange one for me, so I was convinced when I began putting this together that this would easily make it.
Mm-hmm.
And then for lots of reasons, it kept getting bumped down the list, and then it hasn't made it. I think it's because even though I quite like the chorus and the way it goes from the sort of more minory verses into the sort of fun chorus, it does the same thing about 3 times.
Yeah, it does.
So I was like, okay, it didn't make it. But other than that, a song about a twatty American hunter, I'm in. Yeah, normally.
I went back and forth on this one. It went in and out a few times, and I think I've kept it. And I find it is repetitive. You're right, and the chorus is just kind of, you could say it's pastiching, but it's sort of lazy as well, even with that. But I found something about the verses, particularly the sort of weird mood of the verses, interesting. And it's that weird, that inexplicable bit where someone, I don't even know which one of the Beatles or if it's someone else, someone does that sort of female sounding voice where they say,
the old, I think it's meant to be Bungalow Bill's mum saying like,
when he looked so fierce,
Yes, it was like I saw him or something like that. If looks could kill, it could have been us instead of him.
It's so weird.
Yes, like again, every omission's hard, and I was surprised this one didn't make it. But I think it was because also I have quite a lot of the sort of the weirder John ones in, so I thought that of that kind of John song, I have other versions.
Yeah. No, actually, we'll get more onto this. I don't want to let this out of our sights in a way, but like I was saying that several of these tracks sort of provide templates for some of the stuff that the solo Beatles would go on to do. I'd only just thought, because I see that Yoko's credited as being part of the backing vocals on this and stuff. In fact, it might be her voice intruding at that point that I was talking about. This is kind of almost like a Plastic Ono band template in a way, isn't it?
Yeah. Yes. I feel sort of bad leaving it off now, because I do like those ones where John is being, not being a po-faced, and not being proud of himself for being a philosopher poet, not being intentionally surreal in a very sort of heavy-handed, on the nose way. And this is he does all that. It's a good humoured song, and yet I've still sacked it off. Don't know why.
Yeah, well, these are tough choices. Here's another one, number 7, While My Guitar Gently Weeps.
I missed that one off, which I know will probably annoy the purists.
Yeah, I've missed it off too. I've never particularly liked it. This is a lot of the stuff that I'm not keen on in Harrison. This is the sort of lead on from your chat about Lennon there. This is the pious, fairly self-important. There's a few kind of things you could consider as jokes in it, but it's pretty straightforwardly, po-faced guitar rock, and it's got all the sort of stuff that I don't really connect with. So like it's venerated by sort of guitar rock purists. It's become one of the sort of canon of late 60s kind of inventing kind of classic rock kind of stuff. It's got all the sort of guitar wankery towards the end, which is just sort of pointless. It's got all the sort of in another Beatles song I'd forgive this or find it endearingly ridiculous, but all the sort of gasps of like whoa almost from Harrison and stuff, I'm just like, is that serious? I think it's serious in this case, and I just
if you're getting Clapton in to do it, you've got you're moving into a different kind of sort of self-serious territory that amongst the blues purists. I know it's not a blues song, but the musos, and I'm not really into that sort of thing. And it is a little bit po-faced and a little bit navel-gazy.
It's also long. Like I've just said, as I say, I've got the running times in front of me. I see it's like nearly 5 minutes long, and it's just on an album where that's generally not the case. It sort of feels a bit out of place.
We'll come to Revolution 9 later.
Yeah, well, of course we will. Happiness is a Warm Gun, track 8.
This made it, which is so this is the end of my problem of having 3 Lennon songs in a row. I like the fact that it's, like I say, it is 3 songs sort of glued together. The middle bit being my favourite.
Is that the Mother Superior Jump the Gun segment?
Yes, Mother Superior Jump the Gun.
Yeah, that's awesome.
And it is a little bit different to Glass Onion, which is the previous track in my version. It's a bit less surreal and psychedelic, but I don't know. I like it, and I thought it made it. There we go.
It's sort of like a cheat in that every segment of it is like a pretty cool, odd, peak era Beatles song, isn't it? So you kind of get 3 in by picking it.
3 for 1 on an album where that seems to be the MO.
Yeah, this is one of the most boringly predictable ones for me in picking it, because I was just like, well, it almost like something spectacular would have to happen on the re-listen for me not to have included it, and it didn't. I was just like, yeah, that's so great.
Yeah, I think it's pretty much the first song I think of when I think of the White Album, more or less. I would like to test that with myself and see, like, if somebody spontaneously in the middle of the week says White Album, quickly name a track. But I think I'd say Happiness Was a Warm Gun.
Yeah, Birthday. No. We're not there yet. So that actually, I should note that's the end of what was side 1 of the original White Album. So moving on to side 2 and track 9, Martha, My Dear.
Yes, big yes.
Are you serious? Yeah, because me too. And I was really
big yes. Martha, My Dear might be in my top 3 songs on the album.
It really. I don't know about you if you came to it thinking that, but I was really surprised by the re-listen of this. I found it really, really charming.
Yeah, I love it. I think it's great. I think it's McCartney. It's one of the McCartneys of his various incarnations at its best. Like, it's just really deftly written. There's no boring bits to take you to the next melodic passage, where there's always a little melodic surprise in each bit, and it's interesting. It has little weird little sort of rhythmic phrasing. It's and it's really, really sweet. I like it a lot.
Do you think it's sweeter because I think I remember it being written about his sheepdog?
I found that out today. I did not know that.
Yeah.
Until I was just doing some reading before I came on here, and it's about his dog, and now I know that. Yeah, it's even sweeter.
I think that's one of those ones where, a bit like Dear Prudence, when it's not just a conventional romantic love song. It's like it enhances it a bit, I think.
Yeah.
For me, anyway. One of the things I want to talk about, some of the things that I hear in this album in terms of other music that I enjoy or have enjoyed at different times in my life, and I was thinking particularly in the sort of more comic songs kind of tradition, because one thing I really heard in this that really surprised me that I hadn't thought about at all was Neil Hannon. I found that this this sounds a bit like, even a bit vocally, obviously Paul McCartney and Neil Hannon have very different voices, but definitely instrumentally this could be on a Divine Comedy album, I thought.
Well, the fact that it has sort of chamber music kind of vibe with it's just piano led, and that's what I think of when I think of Neil Hannon as being like, chamber pop, isn't it?
Basically, yeah. I definitely heard it on this. I was like, oh yeah, Neil Hannon kind of got I think we talked about the Bends by Radiohead, didn't we, and how entire bands get their career from individual tracks on the Bends and things like that. And I was like, Neil Hannon listened to Martha, My Dear, didn't he? At a formative age. Moving on to track 10, that's I'm So Tired by Lennon. I've kept this one.
I have as well. I'm So Tired is in. For me, it gets on for Curse of Walter Raleigh. He was such a stupid git. I mean, that alone gets it on.
Yeah, that's a great way to bemoan smoking addiction, isn't it?
Yeah. Blame the Explorer that brought it back.
Yeah. No, I like that. So, that's a nice thing where, like, the Beatles, at their best, their sort of lyrical Dadaism and stuff actually makes like interesting and witty connections and things like that. It's a nice and just it's so northern as well. It's charming. Yeah, I like that. I mean, it's got things that I can imagine not liking in other contexts. Like, it's just quite chugging, like it
doing me wrong. Yeah, no joke.
I guess I almost feel that as
give you everything I got for my peace of mind.
I suppose I hear that as all semi-serious as well, which sort of redeems it, as well. It's kind of late night frustration, but I suppose there are some things in the late Beatles that are pointing towards a less imaginative, maybe future, like.
I mean, there's only so much sort of changing of the musical landscape you can do before you start doing the same thing a few times.
Well, I was going to say I'm almost convinced anyway that they're fictional. So I don't like you'd really start stretching credulity a bit if they'd done much more innovating.
I was looking here at my list of when I most recently ordered my favourite songs on the album, and I'm so tired at 3, which seems a bit high for me. But last time I made a list, it's my 3rd favourite song on the album.
Fancy. Well, another double inclusion there. So moving on to this album just keeps going, doesn't it? Blackbird.
Yeah, I kept Blackbird. It seemed like it would be a very sort of churlish omission.
Yeah, I kept Blackbird as well, which I feel is kind of a boring decision, but it's sort of, and I don't mean this to like the be all and end all. Obviously, there's so much defining the Beatles in different respects, but like it's sort of a Yesterday level, just song seemingly plucked from the ether that is just could be sung in centuries. Or I don't want to get too romantic about them, but like it feels like that. It's not even one of my favourite songs. I just mean it has that quality to it.
Yeah, it feels like it's a. Like, you could quite easily believe that it's actually a song written a couple of hundred years ago that they were doing a cover of. Like they were doing, okay, maybe not a couple of hundred years ago, but it's a much older song than it actually is. I think it's based on Spotify. I think it's the most listened to song on the album. That's what I saw. It
also twins very in mood and again the word delicacy very well with Dear Prudence, doesn't it? It's got that childish kind of healing, caring, just kind of like very very anti-macho kind of thing.
Yeah, and it's the it's affected some of my later choices as well, but that was my let Paul do a quiet one on the acoustic guitar talking about nature.
Yeah.
So that's something delicate, like you say. So that's that slot filled.
I know we've just had a run here from Happiness is a Warm Gun through Martha My Dear, I'm So Tired, and Blackbird, where we've both included all 4 of them. That's a pretty solid run there.
Yeah, some good songs there, aren't there?
Yeah, there are a bit. Yeah.
Someone should tell them.
Moving on to track 12, Piggies.
I didn't put Piggies on. Well, I think it's fun and cute and silly. It does feel a bit slight, and I don't need a multi-millionaire telling me about capitalism.
Yeah, so which goes back to Taxman and stuff, right? In a different way. That's interesting because I've included it, and I think
I knew you would. I knew as soon as I admitted it that Dave was definitely going to keep Piggies.
Yeah. Well, why do you think I've done that, or just contrarily, do you mean? Or...
No. I just thought that its brand of sort of silliness and fun, I think that you would put in as a sort of palate cleanser or a change of tone.
Well, I like you're kind of right. I actually like the nastiness of it, and I think this is actually where we're sort of inevitably going to have to mention Charles Manson a little bit, because although as I was looking into it again today, Charles Manson was much more in with the Beach Boys at this point than actually I did not know the Beatles, but obviously the Piggies track is right up there with Helter Skelter in terms of tracks that are associated with perhaps influencing the Manson murders and things like that. And Piggies is more overtly of that tone, isn't it? Because it's all about, it's almost kind of...
Well, what they need damn good thwacking, was it?
Yeah, well, it's funny to come back to the spirit of '68, right? Because there's also, it's a bit Orwell, like I think certainly when I first heard it, I was like, oh, this is a little bit Animal Farm, isn't it? In the anger and what would you call it? Sort of what's the word for hatred of humanity?
Misanthropy.
Misanthropy of it, yeah. It's but there's just something about the way that filtered through the Beatles being quite twee and cutesy. I find that a potent mix, and I don't mean that in a patronising way. I find it more disturbing. I always found the sort of what they need is a damn good whacking, genuinely a bit chilling, and I think that's definitely that it's definitely me not separating it from the Manson murders, but there's just something in that mood I find very like.
I think that George Harrison's mum wrote some of the lyrics to Piggies.
Is that right?
I think I read that somewhere, that like he needed help with, he went to see his mum and she's the one who got away with it.
Then move on to Rocky Raccoon, track 13 of the whole album. Is this in or out?
It didn't make it. I like the sort of Paul sort of silly story songs. I know it's one of the ones that annoyed John as well, which always pleases me. But I don't think that much happens in it, so I didn't really. Yeah, a lot happens in the story, but but musically, not that much happens. And I know that that means you do miss the only kind of like a American kind of country, not country. What's the word after, like sort of honky tonky kind of song?
Yeah.
But yeah, it's. Again, we've got 15 to get to, and it's not one of the best.
Well, I included this one, but I can't really defend it in the way that I was defending some of the other ones, and I particularly can't defend having this and Bungalow Bill both on it, because I mean, not that they're identical, but they're kind of, they've got enough in common in a sort of mood and genre origin to make them a bit defunct. I look at, but I've always really loved it. That's my only defense of Rocky Raccoon, is it's just really fun and silly, and I'm affectionate towards it. Just looking at the one up next. So track 14 is "Don't Pass Me By," the Ringo song. We'll go on to whether you've included it or not in a second. Odd decision putting that right next to Rocky Raccoon that I'd never really thought about.
Well, also, is it because maybe thinking about it, "Don't Pass Me By" has got that sort of country fiddle going on. So maybe to make it sort of feel like a little bit moving on from Rocky Raccoon's Americana-y, rootsy kind of vibe. In keeping with that,
there's a sort of
maybe.
No, there's definitely a companionship there. I just, it's an odd choice. And this is the only Ringo song on the album, and for any Beatles fans, you'll obviously know the Ringo song is a bit of a sort of hallowed tradition, isn't it?
Is it? What about Good Night? Doesn't he sing that?
I suppose. Well, hang on, is Good Night? Good Night is credited, lead vocals for Star, So I suppose this, well, it's a double album, isn't it? So you get one per.
Yeah. Well, this is the one. It's the only song written by Ringo on the album, anyway.
Is this the only song written by Ringo in their whole recorded career?
No, Octopus's Garden.
Octopus's Garden, right? Yeah, which he sings as well. Yeah. But yeah, having a Ringo song on it. This is where I'm really interested to see what choice you've made here, because you were talking about things that make a Beatles album a Beatles album.
Yeah. So I put this on, even though it's quite low down on the list of. Songs, my favourite songs on the album, but I sort of like manually crowbarred this one in because I thought that you should have a Ringo song on in the middle. And as Ringo songs go, I think it's one of the best. Like I know it's a bit plodding, and occasionally there are some lyrical bits which you go, bloody hell, that's a bit, amateur.
Yeah. What the way but, does it mean I don't love you anymore? Doesn't seem to follow from anything in the verse.
No.
Yeah.
But then I don't know, it's kind of there are little bits of it that when the fiddle comes in and stuff that I still think are really cute, and I'm not saying it's one of the 15 best songs on the album by any stretch of the imagination, but it has made it for those reasons.
Yeah, and I've not included it, but I completely get your reasoning there. So moving on to Why Don't We Do It in the Road?
No, this didn't make it.
No, it didn't make it on mine either, but I completely get that. This is very slight, but it's got a charm to it though. It's pretty rollicking,
well, It does, but it begins, it goes through once through, and you go, yeah, and then it carries on like it doesn't need to. Like I have it quite low down. I have it at the bottom of my list on songs on the album. It's one idea that they should have abandoned earlier. I don't know.
Well, this is definitely when you were talking about sketches on the album. This is barely beyond the sketch, is it?
Yeah, and I think John didn't like it because he thought he should have written it or something like that, because it sounds like one of his. And I go, well, that's a bit odd, but
that's a weird one.
Yeah, no, it didn't make it.
I suppose lyrically, it's always sounded like a bit of a riff. Is it like, I can't remember if it's from The Situationist or whatever, but that let's do the thing right here, that kind of late 60s vibe thing. So I guess I can see it being a Lennon song in that respect.
Wasn't it written because in India McCartney saw some monkeys just doing it in the road?
Is that actually a version of?
That's again a thing I remember hearing.
That's really that makes me like it more. I'm putting it back in. That's great. I suppose one thing to be said for that is like, because it is McCartney just noodling vocally as well as at the piano and stuff, and it's McCartney's a really good singer, isn't he? I know that's a really banal observation, but just hearing him do all those kind of, in his solo career and his gigs and stuff in recent decades, it's obviously a bit insufferable just doing all the kind of old rock and roll standards and Chuck Berrying away and stuff like that, but it's kind of he did do it marvelously back then, didn't he? And it's kind of
he can belt it when it comes out, but we'll come to that later.
Yeah. So I will. Did that make the cut for you?
So I will. No, it didn't.
No, it didn't for me either. One thing, we've been caveating all this with like almost everything the Beatles do is so far above most artists that you analyse that it almost bears reminding yourself. I was thinking like, I can imagine, particularly in the earlier 60s, like some crooner, I Will could have been their signature song and they'd be well remembered for it. This is the sort of thing where you talk about these levels of songwriting where it's just, a bit workman-like, but it's, but partly it's the Beatles that made this sort of song workman-like, by surpassing it.
Yeah, it is one of the ones that I find least memorable. Like, I have to go back and listen to it and go, oh yeah, that one, that's the one, that's I Will. But I've already got the sentimental McCartney song slot filled, so I Will didn't make it.
Yeah. Okay, well, yeah, I didn't include it either. Let's move on. So this is the end of the first half of the album on the original copy and the end of side 2. Julia by John Lennon, very much by John Lennon.
So Julia didn't make it, which I feel bad about. It was one of the ones that went to get Don't Pass Me By in.
You try explaining that to John Lennon.
I know.
That's funny.
The other reason that it didn't was because in the running order I had, it would have come immediately after Blackbird, and I thought that just didn't quite flow nicely, having two slow acoustic ones. So I didn't put it through. But I think that was probably a silly thing. So silly omission. It is a very very beautiful song.
Well, I've included it, and it surprised me a little bit because I've got teenage David basically had quite a lot of patience for John Lennon's solo career. Not all of it, and even back then, I found all the sort of sludgy, pious, Imagine and Woman and things like that just insufferable, But I did think that the album with Working Class Hero on and Mother and things like that, was quite impressive and quite raw and all that sort of stuff. And I now found that I like Julia much more. That it's kind of this halfway house, I guess, between his kind of, his introspective, classic era Beatles songs, everything from In My Life to Strawberry Fields in a more sort of surreal way, and his solo indulgences. I just find it kind of nicely poised in the middle there.
Yeah, I don't disagree with any of that. It's not one of the ones where I think he is being self-indulgent or, like you said, pious. It does seem actually one of the sort of more well-observed personal songs, because less about him, really, for once. So yeah, no, but I decided it had to go because I didn't. Putting Don't Pass Me By in does separate it from Julia, which will give it a nice symmetry. But then I've only got one space, so I didn't put it back in.
That's tough, yeah. Well, we'll move on to the second. It's the second half of the album, although it's actually shorter. It's the shorter half in terms of track number. So this is straight in with Birthday, track 18 on the album.
I didn't put Birthday in. Birthday is a fairly low-ranked one on my list of in the order. But I always forget that Birthday has sort of the middle third of Birthday is really good. It's really cool. I just don't really like the down, say it's your birthday for a couple of minutes. I'm like, yeah, I do like that bit in the middle.
Yeah,
where it really goes somewhere else. But it didn't make it either way.
No, it didn't for me either. And I think this is where I should briefly mention that because I was listening to this originally on a double CD. So on two CDs, it was what was side 1 and side 2 basically were put on the first CD and side 3 and 4 on the second CD, and that means Birthday is the opener of the second half of the album as it basically was on the double LP. But I'm like, Birthday's such a I don't know why I think Back in the USSR is such a great opener for the album as a whole, and then Birthday is not. It's not a great start to the second half. Is it just because you've sort of done that more musically, accomplishedly, and imaginatively already, and you're just putting something a bit? Or I suppose it's a bit of an insult to even group Birthday with Back in the USSR, right?
Well, yeah, is it? I mean,
it's just a bit less appealing, I suppose.
Is it just as straightforward as that? Back in the USSR, proper from the moment it begins, goes at breakneck speed, whereas Birthday is do say it's your birthday, do
yeah,
it's my birthday too, yeah. It's a bit stilted,
and I suppose it's childlike. We talked about childlike before. It's childlike and obnoxious, right?
Yeah. Again, well, just I don't quite get what they're trying to do there with that one.
Yeah.
Apart from, again, that can be the ones that I can imagine them just messing around. Like one of them came up with the down riff in the studio, and because you haven't got any lyrics, someone just said, "Yeah, say it's your birthday," and then just you'd expect that to be then ironed out later on to be properly finished, and they never did.
I've just realised, looking ahead to my answers here, I've got an awful lot of no's coming at you. Let's put it that way.
I think I do as well. What we're up to? That was number 16, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think partly just by the hand you played already, you might be picking more from this second half of the album than me in general. Okay. But we'll see where it falls. So going straight into your blues, I don't have that.
No, I don't. I'm not a massive fan of proper 12-bar bluesing it. At the best of times, I certainly don't want it for 4 minutes.
Yeah.
And a very slow version. So yeah, your blues again is a low-ranking one for me. I know that will annoy the Muso blues purists who think that's one of the proper rock songs on that album, but no, I one of my least favourites.
That's all right. They're all dead now, so we don't have to worry about that.
Yay.
Mother Nature's Son. I also didn't pick this.
No, I didn't either. I do like it. It's one of the more higher-ranking omissions. But like I said earlier, with Blackbird, the acoustic song talking about the natural world, sort of gently, that slot has been filled. The position's been filled by Blackbird. So
I feel like there's an extent to which you can compare some of these songs to, not directly on when we're ranking the album, but like in terms of Beatles songs that have been done better previously, or like kind of moods that have been done previously. And this is kind of just the Fool on the Hill Part 2 in some respects.
Yeah.
And less charming, less weird as well.
Yeah. So I didn't put that one on.
Yeah, no, neither did I. So everybody's got something to hide except for me and my monkey, which that's one of the Beatles songs that I remember being introduced to, at least the track titles on the White Album, young enough to just think that was hilarious just because of the title,
I put this on. Probably shouldn't, because it's similar to the earlier sort of Happiness is a Warm Gunny kind of weirdness. But I've got a massive soft spot for that. There's a very, very good cover of it I think it's very good, by the Feelies, and it reminds me of that. And even though the Feelies make me very nostalgic, and I don't listen to them as much as I should anymore, I have a massive soft spot for everything. Everybody's got something to hide.
Nice. I don't have that one on. I think that has become a little bit of one of those tracks that I've just seen playing over montages of 60s news footage so much.
Oh, right, okay.
Like helicopter strafing in Vietnam and things like that. It's just like, that's just, it's almost like just gone into the patchwork of that era now, to the point where I barely even consider it a Beatles song,
Fair.
Yeah. But going on to Sexy Sadie.
Oh, yeah, Sexy Sadie made it.
That's interesting. It didn't for me.
I think I put Sexy Sadie on as one of the songs that sounded like a more complete song rather than a vignette, or it's not super high on my list of favourite songs on this album. It's about halfway. It's next to Bungalow Bill, actually, which is actually above it, but I told you I took Bungalow Bill out. It's got some cool bits, so I put it in.
It's one of the ones, not that I'm trying to retrospectively cancel 60s rock or anything like that, but and this is certainly not the Exhibit A I'd use if I was doing that. But this is one of the few ones that arguably sound. I'd say it sounds vaguely rather than is deeply. Sounds a bit misogynistic, doesn't it? And it's just the old thing of having a song on with a woman that you're both sort of fetishizing and disapproving of her behaviour. And it's just, the only reason I mention that, I don't think Sexy Sadie is a repulsive example of the genre or anything. I just mean it's largely absent from the rest of the album. I
think maybe the reason that I don't see it that way is because I've read somewhere that it's actually Sexy Sadie was what he called the Maharishi.
Oh, I had read that. Yeah, I'd forgotten that. I must have read that years ago. Yeah.
Who John thought was acting inappropriately with some of the female members of the meditation cohort.
Yeah. Is it true? I read for the first time today. I think I'd taken that as fact that the Maharishi did actually abuse his followers. Like, is that actually? I believe it's hearsay. Like Lennon was actually acting on a rumor that was later found unfounded or something like that.
I haven't got a clue, but I just remember reading somewhere that's what this song's about.
It's interesting that Lennon with his with all the stuff about John Lennon's personal life, which we don't have time to go into here, it's interesting that he would be feel like it needs to be sort of like white knighting, as we'd now call it,
Yeah, I mean, or maybe he did write the song exactly in the terms you described, and then when he was called out on it, went, "No, I was actually being I was the hero."
Yeah, John Lennon's. We touched on Julia. Like John Lennon's relationship to women in general is just like essay worthy, isn't it? You know, it's like there's just a lot going on there. So going on to Helter Skelter.
Oh yes.
And did you immediately go out and murder someone after listening to this?
Well, as soon as I heard it, I just thought that there has to be a race war coming. Yeah, I know there are some like I think there are some sort of. I think the contemporary critics, the ones who were writing and thought that basically all music should sound like Dylan, and everything else is a mistake, really didn't like Helter Skelter. Thought it was just noise. I think it got some bad reviews, but as far as I can tell, it fucking shreds. So,
well, is this one of the ones that they sort of credit with contributing towards inventing metal? If you sort of squint hard enough.
I heard that from loads of people saying that it's proto metal.
Because this is
I
like
say that sometimes to myself.
Just about pre-Black Sabbath and things like that. You know, this is kind of
just about a year before Sabbath. Yeah, well, before Sabbath's first album anyway. I know some people think it's just noise for however long it is, but
this has almost all of the stuff. This, if you take this as side 3, this has almost all the stuff on that you think of as like heavier in a sort of conventional way, doesn't it? I've just realised.
Yeah.
Your blues, your Monkey, and the Helter Skelter.
Yeah, a bit more rock. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's really. So did you pick this one then? Did you include it?
Oh yeah, Helter Skelter's in.
Yeah, right. Interesting. No, I didn't.
But also, there's no other song on the album that sounds like Helter Skelter. There's no other song in the Beatles canon that sounds like Helter Skelter.
Yeah.
So missing it out just seemed egregious to me.
Yeah, and I suppose we talk about all the innovations they made. Like, if they accidentally invent a genre that I just don't particularly happen to care for, that's still quite an achievement. That's not something to shrug off. So, finishing out side 3 with Long Long.
Yeah, Long Song.
Is it?
That's my up there with Martha, My Dear, one of my favourite songs on the album.
Oh, interesting. You know, it was far more interesting than I remembered it being.
Yeah, it completely I completely forgot how much I like it. If you'd asked me before you asked me to do this to quickly name all the songs on the White Album, I reckon I'd forgotten Long.
Yeah, I didn't. The
chord progression is lovely. It's so nice.
I remembered it as being a sort of uninteresting dirge, which I think it's basically what I was remembering was the start of it. You know, which is at least you could throw that accusation at it, whereas it actually goes to a few different places, doesn't it? You know?
Yeah, and it's a side of when George is doing his meditative navel gazing songs, I normally go, oh fucking hell, come on George, do something fun. Which will come to in a minute. But as far as that type goes, it's one of my favourite George songs by some way.
Interesting, yeah. So I didn't include it, but I see why you did. That was up there with Martha, My Dear in the way my opinions changed. And it's interesting that 2 of your favourites on the album are the ones where my opinion changed most of this re-listen. You know.
Yeah. They're my 2 favourites based on my most recent listen.
So moving on to side 4 of the original album, and we're getting to the real backstretch of the album as a whole now. So you got Revolution 1.
I did not put Revolution 1 on.
I did. So I think we mentioned in the first half that this is Is this something weird? Because I always thought of it as a re-record, a redo essentially of Revolution, the iconic single essentially that came out before the album. Is this one of those weird things where this one was actually recorded first, or is it? It
sounds like it, doesn't it? It sounds like this is the demo version.
Yeah.
And which I actually prefer because I think it is a little. There's something a bit more reserved about it that way than the very in-your-face sort of stomp of the single.
It's more ambivalent. It makes almost everything in it feel more ambiguous in terms of the sentiments and stuff.
Yeah. Considering that its political sentiments are a tad tentative. A tentative version of that song, adds to that a little bit. Whereas the single version, it seems odd to have bravado about having no opinion whatsoever.
Well, Revolution was famously the single version was famously used for a Nike campaign in the 80s, which was a lot of people see as like ultimately the death of the 60s wasn't the 70s. It was what then got repurposed and repackaged in the 80s. But you would talk about like reversions and kind of. I guess disavowals and stuff in this version. Like everyone comments on the bit where he says, you can count me out in. Literally just does 2 takes of it.
Yeah, just
use take 1.
Edit as you see fit.
I suppose it's that again another mode of the Beatles that they wouldn't really have the chance to settle into because they're still so full of ideas and stuff to get out of into the open. But like this just sort of stoned, swampy kind of jam band version of the Beatles is kind of one I find quite appealing, really. But I guess because I didn't hear too much of it, they didn't just go on to then make several albums worth of this sort of stuff,
Yeah, I just don't want another Grateful Dead in my life.
Yeah, they're still hassling you, aren't they?
Yeah, yes.
Yeah, no, I did include it. So next we got Honey Pie.
Honey Pie's in.
I didn't put Honey Pie in, but it was pretty tough.
I'm not surprised. Oh, was it? I thought I thought that would be one of the easy calls.
No, it wasn't actually.
I just think it's like, again, I love all that sort of Paul music hall stuff. And I think it's better than any Noel Coward song ever. Yeah, Paul just tries writing another music hall song, and it's just got more innovation and more like not more innovation, more what's the word I'm after? More ideas and than musical ideas than most songs from around then. I think it's really catchy. I think it's really well written.
I love the now she's hit the big time loudspeaker kind of
and from Northern England way.
Yeah, North of England way. There's a couple of things I want to briefly mention with this, even though I've not included it, and actually in some ways they're more the sort of things I should have brought up when we were talking about Obladi Oblada, but I think they're admissible here. But like I really, I said I was thinking about Neil Hannon, thinking forward to like Neil Hannon when we listened to Martha My Dear. One thing I was thinking in terms of actual influence on this Beatles album, and it came partly from listening to Magical Mystery Tour as well the other week, was I was remembering that in the Magical Mystery Tour film, they have Viv Stanshall sing Death Cab for Cutie, which is a Bonzo Dog Doodah Band song, one of the better known songs, a striptease scene. Magical Mystery Tour is a very odd film if everyone's not seen it. The Beatles knew the Bonzos a bit, and there was a bit of interplay there, and Neil Innes, a bigger sort of go-between and stuff like that. I think there's quite because my dad was a big Bonzo Dog Doodah Band fan, and I also know their albums very well, and have a lot of mixed feelings about the Bonzo Dog Doodah Band, but are basically very interested in them. And I hear a lot of the Bonzos on this album in general, actually, and that's one of those weird things where I can't believe I haven't made that connection before, because they're literally making albums in exactly the same era. They knew each other, liked each other, and I know both of them very well, so it's kind of like I was like,
yeah, and featuring each other's films,
yeah. But I think I heard that on Obladi Oblada. I heard it. What it made me think as well is I remember, this might be from Revolution in the Head as well, but I think thinking back as far as, is it like Robert Soul would Drive My Car and stuff? Do you remember like the Beatles had this phase where they were like, now we're just going to be a comedy band, and like for about 5 minutes that was their career plan,
No, I did not know. I did not know that happened. I can imagine them having an idea for 5 minutes and then abandoning it. That seemed to be their entire career after Brian Epstein died.
Yeah. The only difference between that and the way you and I make decisions is they had about 1,000 ideas and 500 of them were good.
Yeah, and many pounds.
That too, yeah. But no, I didn't include this, but I just wanted to mention that Bonzo's thing before we went further. So you go straight from that to Savoy Truffle.
Yeah, I put Savoy Truffle in.
Yeah, I've included that too.
Bit of a George Rocker, yeah.
I think I sort of thought, I know they're not direct equivalents, but I sort of thought I can't really have Savoy Truffle and Honey Pie, and I had to make a choice, for some reason.
Really? Okay, no, yeah, for me they were just in different worlds, so I didn't really mind putting them both in. I mean, they both involve foodstuffs, I guess.
That's maybe literally how simple it was. I think it's funny, my mate Alex was talking to me about this the other day, and he was just saying, you'll have to include that just for the way George Harrison says Montélimar. Which I think he's right there. Yeah, it's sort of delightful, isn't it? But and just throw away in the best way, I guess.
Yeah, it's a throwaway, but it's really catchy, and it does rock.
Yeah,
I know it's sort of a boring thing to say, but it does. And there's not much of that. Like one thing I mentioned earlier, like how few actual proper songs there are that things that could be singles basically.
Yeah.
And Small Truffle could be.
Yeah.
So yeah.
I quite like its self-containedness as well on an album, where, as I say, like a lot of them bleed into each other and stuff. This ends very abruptly, with that duh, 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 duh. And I think for reasons about the end content of the album, I think it's important on my version to have that kind of abrupt stop here. So next, Cry Baby Cry.
Yeah, that song.
Include this?
Yeah.
Yeah, so this one really knocked me for six, right? Because that's one of my favourite songs on the album, and always has been, and still is. And this is the one, I think you made an equivalent decision. This is the one that I knocked out because I think it makes it work. It makes this version of the album work better.
Okay, so you did what I did with USSR basically.
Basically, yeah, for much the same reasons. So I think I love Cry Baby Cry not only because it's the only Beatles song to mention Kirkcaldy, or is it just a place in Scotland in general, the only Beatles song to do that? But the specificity of that and just the sort of weird hauntedness of this, I've always loved, particularly the verses. I think the verses are genuinely spooky.
Yeah. I mean, it's one of my favorite Beatles songs. Full stop. Top 10 probably, but I couldn't. Because it didn't affect. Well, we'll talk about this. It didn't affect the running order as much as the USSR problem.
Yeah,
I kept it in, but I think I probably. This is when I'm coming to my major problem that I spoke about at the beginning about how to end this, because I have one slot left basically.
Right. And, yes. I look forward to getting into that. Yeah. I think this is, we touched on psychedelia before and stuff. I think when I say I really admire the verses in this, or they really work for me, it's that it's a bit trite to say it's sort of like psychedelia, but it's sort of the Grimm's fairy tale version of psychedelia. But that's what the verses about the duchesses and the king and stuff like that. In this, it's like there's something dark going on in the mood of this song, and it's about people doing weird characters doing weird things in closed off rooms, and this is where you maybe get back to the doll's house thing as well, of like this. I don't know why there's a baby crying. You know what I mean? Like I don't know why it's a sort of haunted lullaby. I don't know why these scenes are put aside it, and I don't know why these anachronistic characters are kind of are in this. But I love that they are, and it's just. I think. I know this sounds weird that I'm saying all this stuff about a track I've left off, but as I say, I think I've justified my choice there.
I think it's one of the ones where, for once, well, not for once, John's normally quite heavy-handed surrealism, where it's almost like word association most of the time, actually does end up being more than the sum of its parts, and like genuinely creates a strange world in a way that he's not always successful doing. I don't think.
Yeah, no, I get you on that. So moving on to Revolution 9, it's funny, I see on Wikipedia this is, because they've got a list of the tracks that I've been making reference to here, and they tend to credit the lead vocalist or co-vocalist. Yeah. Here the credit is speaking from Lennon, Harrison, Ono, and George Martin.
So basically, just to come back to the problem I have one slot yet left, currently filled by the original last track on the album, but missing out Revolution 9 feels like missing out a large part of what makes the album what it is. Yeah. Like a genuinely landmark piece of work. I think it's less successful than it thinks it is. It's one of the ones where I think the things that influence it are actually better than it.
Right.
And also, I can just hear the Simpsons go number 8, number 8.
Yes,
number 8.
That's inescapable.
And somebody ordering a bowl of hats filled with perfume with a single plum in it. Yeah, there you go. So currently it's not there. I mean, but it is long, and there are bits in it where I was listening to it earlier, and there's a bit where it sort of falls into a rhythm for a bit, maybe about 20 seconds. It sounded like a One Tricks Point Never song or something, and I thought, look, that's really, really good. And then it goes somewhere else really quickly, which I know is the point. And then it doesn't make, apart from little bits, it doesn't make me feel much. But I understand it's an important experiment. I understand that it is an important step in the Beatles becoming who they were and their influence on music. And I know it's what makes the White Album what it is. So missing it out feels like a proper, like, not an emotional mistake like back in the USSR does, but like an intellectual mistake.
I love Revolution 9. I've definitely included it. I think it's landmark, as you say. I think it's absurdly underrated, actually. I think, like, particularly at the time, obviously. I think that opinion has improved on it, and so much of that is tied up with Yoko Ono and the perception of Yoko Ono and her influence on the Beatles' career, particularly. That it's again almost too much to get into now, but like. She was very involved with this, I believe, and helped, advise Lennon on cutting up tape loops and things like that. She was a co-producer of this. This is an Ono credit, really, or should be.
Yeah.
It's brilliant. I think it's absolutely brilliant, and I'd never heard anything like it. My dad was quite into like quite a lot of experimental music, and Zappa and AMM and some electronic stuff, and this is obviously the accessible end of that by and large, but it's. We talk about the spirit of '68 and stuff in this album, and critics saying that they don't engage with it. I mean, to be a bit silly about the metaphor for a bit, if we are sort of locked in a doll's house and all these weird dark rooms and stuff in this album, this insular stuff, fascinating but insular. This feels almost like opening the windows and just finding what's outside too much to bear, almost. Like it's almost had that mood for me of like just being overwhelmed, and because there's a lot of the vocal stuff going on. It is people that sound like they're suffering, and finding it or yelling and chanting, and but people crying, and sort of one bit that should be silly, I've always found really haunting is the bit where it sounds like Lennon. The bit where he's kind of going, I'll try and make the noise, sort of, woo, woo. It's sort of, he's making that strange noise that's like animalistic and should just be sort of goofy, but I find it sounds like something indescribable is happening to him almost,
Yeah, I know what you mean, and I pretty much agree with everything. I think the only difference between you and me is that I didn't quite come to it in the same way that you did, so I didn't have, like I said earlier, my parents play me the White Album, and if they had played me the White Album, this would be the song they'd skip, based on their tastes. So I would have come to it, like I say, fairly late, and probably either at a point where I wanted rock music, so I wasn't really interested. I probably would have definitely been swallowing the bullshit about Oh No and her negative influence on the Beatles, pretty much wholesale. Or it would have been even later than that, and I would have found it like less interesting than, say, the kind of warp label-y stuff I would have been listening to in my late teens.
Yeah.
So I don't have any sort of nostalgic things for it, but that doesn't mean, like, again, the other reason that it's in this slot, whether it's either this or the next track, is because I don't think it's a good album ender. So maybe what I should do is cull one of the other ones and then bump the next two up. But
you definitely need a bumper after it, in my opinion.
Yes, you can't end on it.
Just one thing at random that I've always really loved. It might be one of my favourite things that happens on a Beatles album is, when John Lennon is going through those, is it like the Watusi, the twist, and things like that, and then out of nowhere, it sounds like Harrison, but he goes as though something's just occurred to him. He goes, El Dorado. Or maybe that's George Martin. I'm not sure because I didn't see that he was credited on this. But whoever says El Dorado in that way, in that sort of wistful way, it's just the answer to something that's been nagging him for ages. It's just El Dorado. I just love that. Love that so much. So having both included that, I think tentatively included that in your case. Yeah. Would you like to make a decision on that because you hadn't really?
Well, okay. So I currently have basically that it's that slash. Good Night.
Okay, yeah.
Now, Good Night basically has to end the album, doesn't it? So what I should probably do is get rid of something earlier on, and then bump everything up. So I end with Cry Baby Cry, Revolution 9, and Good Night. Let's say, looking at it now, the one that is leaping out to me is like I don't quite know why that's in there. It's Sexy Sadie.
Mm-hmm.
So let's bump Sexy Sadie off the list, bless it, and then we'll put Cry Baby Cry, Revolution 9, and Good Night on.
Okay, just making a note of that for posterity.
Yeah.
For your descendants. That's great. I see, actually, by the way, that you've got your run at the end there is you've included all the last 5 tracks of the actual album.
Yeah.
26, so almost the entirety of side 4, really. Which is a testament to. I do think that's one of the strongest stretches of the album. I think I think probably the beginning and the end really are the strongest stretches of it.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, great. Well, that was fascinating. I think we got through quite a lot there, and I will put both our lists. I think I've got note of your choices here, so you don't have to send me that or anything. But I'll put both of those up beyond a spoiler wall, if I can even technically do that on the podcast thing. But thanks for joining me to talk about that. That's really fascinating. Go through the White Album. I think a really interesting album to look at, and I hope you will come back and talk about other things in the future.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's an absolute pleasure. Yeah. Great. Well, thanks for listening to the EscapeGoat podcast, everyone, and we'll see you back soon. Bye.
Bye.
In England, we have marmalade and we put it on bread, but we also put it on record. The marmalade and obla-di-obla-da! Desmond has a bottle in the marketplace. Molly is the singer in the band. Desmond says to Molly, girl, I like your face. And Molly says this as she takes him by the hand. Obla-di, obla-da, life goes on. Whoa, whoa.
trolley to the jeweler's store, buys a 20-carat golden ring, takes it back to Molly waiting at the door, and as he gives it to her, she begins to sing. Obla-dee, obla-da, life goes on. Oh, la-la-la-la, life goes on. Obla-dee, obla-da, life goes on. Oh, la-la-la-la, life goes on.
You've been listening to the EscapeGoat podcast, hosted by David Fagiani. If you want to contact the podcast with any feedback or thoughts, you can leave comments on our Libsyn page or under our YouTube videos, or email us at escapegoatpod@gmail.com. You can also reach the show on Twitter on @egoat_pod and follow us for new episode notifications. This podcast is available on YouTube, Apple Podcasts and Spotify, as well as our Libsyn site, escapegoatpodcast.libsyn.com. Original intro, outro, and any other incidental music for this podcast is composed, produced, and made available by permission of Richard Gilbert.